Chapter 708. The end of a legend. Mu Shengji's aura was terrifying just now. It was simply extremely terrifying. One could imagine how horrifying was the secret technique, which he prepared a moment ago. After all, it was a secret technique Mu Xingjie used as a trump card. If Mu Xingjie really released it, Yi Shiwen might not be able to deal with it currently. Hence, how could he let Mu Xingjie release the secret technique successfully? Everyone was almost dumbfounded, staring dazedly at the scene in front of them. This actually happened. This is no ordinary man at all. This is Mu Xingjie, the next hallmaster of the Great Law Enforcement Hall. He is Mu Xingjie in the Great Sage Great Perfection realm. How could he be bombarded constantly like a dead dog by someone else? His body is constantly blasted away. Is this the end of the world? Otherwise, how could they witness such an impossible thing? Haha, I know that you will have a way, junior brother. Bai Jiansong said with a hearty laugh. He finally felt relieved now. Originally, he kept worrying about how Yi Shiwen could fight against Mu Xingjie. Even the senior brother had to go all out to fight against this terrifying character, Mu Xingjie, without daring to take him lightly. No matter how talented and genius Yi Shiwen was, the most important thing was that his age was too young, and his cultivation time was too short. His cultivation time was not at the same level as Mu Xingjie at all. But after seeing how Mu Xingjie was miserably beaten up by Yi Shiwen now, Bai Jiansong finally believed what Yi Shiwen said before. He would not fight a battle if he was not confident in winning, and he would not do things that he was unsure of. However, even if Bai Jiansong had high confidence in Yi Shiwen previously, he would never dare to expect to witness this scene. The best ending he could think of previously was that Yi Shiwen could contend with Mu Xingjie without being killed by Mu Xingjie. Then, Yi Shiwen could hang on until Huang Wuji and Tibetan Star Sun were back. Now it simply seemed unnecessary. Yi Shiwen could settle Mu Xingjie by himself. If Bai Jiansong was not acquainted with Yi Shiwen and knew that he was still at half-step Great Sage 3 months ago, he would probably think that Yi Shiwen already had such strength initially, instead of using secret techniques. Because it did not seem like any secret technique was used. It was more like summoning Yi Zaiwen's own strength. However, Bai Jiansong had no idea that Yi Shiwen really did not use any secret technique, and just summoned the Star Beast avatar. Otherwise, he would never be Mu Xingjie's opponent. Yi Zaiwen's expression was cold while looking at Mu Xingjie. He wanted to take advantage to kill Mu Xingjie while Mu Xingjie was weak. He never thought of letting Mu Xingjie go. So he raised his golden fist raised and slammed downward again. Bang! Mu Xingjie was blasted out by Yi Shiwen again, and his mouth was bleeding profusely. There was no complete piece of flesh on his body, and a bunch of bones could be seen almost everywhere. This meant that Mu Xingjie's body was very sturdy, even sturdier than fierce deity True Body. If it was an average person, Yi Shiwen had already smashed him directly into a meat patty. Yi Shiwen, do you dare to fight with me fairly without using the secret technique? Roared Mu Xingjie. The secret technique that Mu Xingjie mentioned was not Yi Zaiwen's sudden rise from half-step Great Sage to Great Sage Great Perfection realm. He was referring to Yi Zaiwen's soaring combat power after that. Perhaps Mu Xingjie didn't even notice that he had a trace of timidness. In other words, he was attacked by Yi Shiwen to the point of being frightened. This was never the case previously. He dared to attack the opponent in the past even if he was against a person of a higher realm than him. He had never been timid. Even if Huang Wuji stepped into the Great Sage Great Perfection realm ahead of him, he had never been timid. But he was indeed timid now, and he didn't even realize it at all. He already felt that he couldn't beat Yi Shiwen who used the secret technique, so he requested for a fair fight. Mu Xingjie never thought that he would utter the so-called fairness at this time, which he didn't even care about in his heart initially. Mu Xingjie had a disdainful mentality towards the so-called fairness request originally. What is fairness? Only weak people will ask for fairness. The strong are living in an unfair world where different levels of strong men rule over different levels of matter. Mu Xingjie actually asked for fairness now because in the mentality of his heart, he actually became a weak man who was eager for a fair fight. He had strong confidence in himself that he would not be afraid of Yi Shiwen at all if it was a fair fight. In fact, Yi Shiwen would not be his opponent, and would be killed by him. Just like previously, Yi Shiwen was beaten up terribly by him. You want fairness? As a great sage, great perfection realm, you came to kill me, a half-step great sage. Do you think this is fair? Yi Shiwen smiled disdainfully, and just dismissed the so-called fairness. When Mu Xingjie was an honored great sage, great perfection, and came to the Tibetan Star Summit to kill Yi Shiwen in person previously, did Mu Xingjie ever consider giving him time and wait for him to advance to have a fair fight? Mu Xingjie didn't even think about fairness previously. When he fell into a disadvantageous position, he wanted to be fair. How absurd was it? But it was exactly because of this, Yi Shiwen saw Mu Xingjie's lack of confidence clearly. Mu Xingjie was not confident to defeat Yi Shiwen, who seemed to be using some secret technique. Yi Shiwen occupied the absolute upper hand, and was dominating everywhere in the universe. Although his current body was not a tyrant body, the tyranny aura developed through his long-term cultivation of tyrant body scripture was released unconsciously. Yi Shiwen deliberately concealed his aura with aura convergence martial art usually, so it was not obvious. But now he didn't conceal deliberately, so all aura burst out at once. Yi Shiwen was just like an overlord who came from ancient times and looked at Mu Xingjie coldly. Mu Xingjie's eyes were crimson, and was almost choked by Yi Ziwen's words. Yeah, I never thought of the so-called fairness just now, and never thought that killing Yi Shiwen as a great sage, great perfection realm is very unfair. Roar! Mu Xingjie screamed long and loud. His Buddhist strength exploded and rushed out towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's icy voice sounded in his ear. It's over. Your legend is over. A huge stamp slammed down from the universe, just like a huge mountain crashing directly. Boom! It was the crush of absolute power. The powerful force directly blasted all the defenses on Mu Xingjie's body without any fancy tricks. The force smashed him straight onto a meteorite, shattering the meteorite directly. Blood gushed out profusely from his mouth, and his body was about to break apart completely. Yi Ziwen's power was too great. If it wasn't for Mu Xingjie's sturdy body, he would already be dead by this time. What a terrifying combat power this is. Everyone was dumbfounded. How could this happen? How could this happen? Yi Ziwen's strong performance simply overturned the world views in their hearts. That is actually Mu Xingjie. Prior to this, even the people who were most optimistic about Yi Shiwen would not have imagined such a result. The best ending they could think of was that Yi Shiwen stopped Mu Xingjie's pursuit, and Mu Xingjie could not kill him. But now all of this had obviously turned all their views upside down, especially those of law enforcement hall disciples. It was like seeing the God in their hearts failing. They were dumbfounded, and their worldview had collapsed. How could this happen? Mu Xingjie, who was invincible in their hearts, was actually defeated. It was a massive defeat to Yi Shiwen, who was not looked upon highly by others previously. Moreover, it was a defeat without any suspense. One small step made a great difference. How could this happen? Many older generation masters were sighing. They were considered to be the same generation as Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji, and some even earlier than that. They personally witnessed how Mu Xingjie achieved glory step by step, and became a part of true martial school's legend. But this legend was coming to an end now. For them, their hearts panicked for a moment. An era was over, signifying the end of a legend. A legend and an era that belonged to them was coming to an end. Although there was still Huang Wuji was almost on par with Mu Xingjie. Since Mu Xingjie was defeated, Huang Wuji, many people were not so confident in Huang Wuji. With this battle, Yi Shiwen was probably going to rise strong. This was a new emerging era and a new legend. This legend was achieved by defeating the old legend. It was the same as when they witnessed Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie defeated one after another old legends to achieve their own legend. This marked the end of this era. The end of a legend. If you don't have a secret technique, you can't be my opponent at all. Mu Xingjie shouted bitterly. Yi Shiwen kept retreating due to his attacks just now, but when he was feeling proud, he didn't expect that the situation suddenly changed in a flash. The situation was suddenly reversed from Mu Xingjie pursuing Yi Shiwen to Yi Shiwen pursuing him. It was as if he had entered hell from heaven in an instant. As long as it is enough to kill you. He didn't want to continue bickering, and it didn't matter at all now. Yi Shiwen stepped out in one step and caught up with Mu Xingjie. He wanted to kill Mu Xingjie once and for all. That's enough. A command burst out of the true martial school underneath. The voice was echoing like a great bell. It was just like a sound penetrated straight into a person's heart. A giant hand tore the skyline apart and grabbed Yi Shiwen to prevent him from killing Mu Xingjie. Yi Shiwen felt an inexplicable great force press down suddenly. This was a force that made him unable to resist at all. It was a force that surpassed the great sage realm. In the face of this power, Yi Shiwen was timid like a rabbit facing a ferocious lion. There was no chance of winning at all. Due to the sudden surprise, the pair of demon's wings behind him flapped suddenly. Yi Shiwen appeared hundreds of miles away instantly, avoiding this giant hand. Chapter 709. Return of the Tibetan Star Sun. Yi Shiwen narrowly avoided being caught by this big hand. Just as he let out a sigh of relief, the Transcendent Realm Master attacked. He knew that if Mu Xingjie couldn't hold on till the end, it was likely that the Transcendent Realm Master would intervene. This was because as far as he knew, such a master ran the law enforcement hall. Not to mention, he was Mu Xingjie's teacher. How could he watch Mu Xingjie die in Yi Ziwen's hands? Therefore, Yi Shiwen made up his mind to make a quick kill. Just now he suddenly adjusted the Dragon Vein power output with the idea to eliminate Mu Xingjie in one fell swoop, leaving no chance of survival. However, he was obviously still a step slower. He was actually interrupted by the Transcendent Realm Master. He was secretly dripping with cold sweat. The Transcendent Realm Master was worthy of being the Transcendent Realm Master. Powers like that were hard to contend against. He did not seem to even be on the same level as a great sage. Fortunately, Yi Ziwen's demon wings were fast enough. In addition, he was already mentally prepared and had been guarding against the intervention of the Transcendent Realm Master. So he managed to narrowly avoid this terrifying attack. It was just one attack that gave him chills deep in his heart. The Transcendent Realm was terrifying. People usually talked about how great a great sage was, and how a great sage was like a pillar. Only after battling with a Transcendent Realm Master would they understand that the gap between the two was so big that ordinary people simply could not understand it. It was just like how the ants crawling on the ground would never understand the world of the eagle in the sky. He really had the strength to kill Yi Shiwen with one blow. The Transcendent Realm Master was the true pillar of true martial school. These few people were the ones holding up the backbone of true martial school. Just like how the Tibetan Star Summit had only had one heir for several generations, but their legacy was still extremely influential. The reason was no other than because the Tibetan Star Summit was run by a powerful Transcendent Realm powerhouse. However, what Yi Shiwen didn't expect was that the other party did not stop at rescuing Mu Xingjie. He straightaway formed a big hand and suddenly reached to grab Yi Shiwen. This was in order to eliminate Yi Shiwen, and he was very determined. Yi Shiwen was suddenly terrified. He hurriedly spread the demon's wings behind him and began to fly away. With his already terrifying speed, not to mention the power of the Dragon Vein, allowed him to traverse hundreds of miles instantly. However, despite this, he was almost killed by that big hand. Even though it didn't touch his body, the terrifying blast of air that surged made it hard for him to catch his breath, and he almost coughed up a mouthful of blood. The terrifying blast of air could make his star beast's body almost vomit blood. It was conceivable how frightening this force was. However, the big hand didn't intend to stop. It straightaway grabbed at him again, and Yi Shiwen almost got caught. Boom, boom, boom. The big hands clutched at nothing, and the empty spaces that were seized collapsed completely. Yi Shiwen managed to dodge away from those attacks by only a hairbreadth. However, Yi Ziwen's speed was getting slower even with the additional support from the Dragon Vein. Despite him being able to dodge away, those attacks worsened his injury, thus slowing down his speed. Just when he was about to get caught, another big hand tore through the sky and directly grabbed that big hand. Sure Dowling, do you think that there is no one defending Tibetan Star Summit? A cold voice came directly from the depths of the universe. Countless people stared at the scene in front of them. They didn't know who would be so bold. It should be known that Shi Dowling was the current law enforcement hall master, who was a powerful figure at true martial school. There were only a few people who could compete with him. The others didn't even dare to say his name. Over time, many new people didn't even know that the name of the law enforcement hall master was Shi Daoling. Many people just called him Law Enforcement Hall Master. Now there was someone who dared to address him directly by name. Many quick-witted people had guessed that it was the Law Enforcement Hall Master, Shi Daoling, who had attacked. In the Law Enforcement Hall, only he had such strength that could render Yi Shiwen unable to fight back. Before this, no one at all thought that they would encounter such a scene, or see the scene where the legend fell. To the many masters present, the Transcendent Realm Masters were too far away. He was not on the same level as them at all. On the contrary, people like Wuxia, who was closer to the audience, accomplished his legend with hundreds of years of battles. How powerful was he? He was known as the best among the true martial school's disciples. Only a few people could match him. His attacks were mighty, but he ended up beaten terribly by Yi Shiwen and almost died. Even someone like him was defeated by Yi Shiwen. One could imagine how shocked they were. Even Wuxia was defeated in this way. Yi Ziwen's position in the people's hearts rose to an unimaginable degree, replacing Wuxia or placing even higher than Wuxia. Such a character was actually beaten with no power to fight back. Was there anything else besides the Transcendent Master? Coupled with this cold shout, many quick-witted people already guessed that it was the Law Enforcement Hall Master who started it. No wonder he could immediately render Yi Shiwen unable to fight back. He was indeed extremely terrifying. However, what really shocked them was, who dared to call Shi Daoling's name directly? Tibetan Star Sun? Have you returned? A voice filled with doubt came from True Martial School. Everyone suddenly realized that this person was actually the Tibetan Star Sun, another legendary figure. As the first generation of the Tibetan Star Summit, although it was passed down linearly, being able to have transcendent realm powers made the Tibetan Star Sun's powers very frightening. If I haven't returned, how would I know that you would dare to do this ruthless act? A cold voice came from the universe. A profound old man could be seen stepping out from the depths of the universe. He appeared slow but was actually fast. In an instant, like lightning, he had already reached the battlefield where Yi Shiwen and Wuxia were combating. He was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. His eyes were bright, so deep that the end couldn't be seen. However, if you looked at him on a normal day, he was simply an ordinary old man. Beside him, a young man stood proudly. An air of arrogance surrounded him, as if he was the center of the entire universe, strongly attracting everyone's attention. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized this young man. He was none other than the great senior brother, Huang Wuji. Then, the identity of the old man in front of him was self-evident. He was the first head of the Tibetan Star Summit, Tibetan Star Sun. Without hesitation, Yi Shiwen quickly healed his injuries with Phoenix regeneration technique. He stepped forward and said, "Greetings to Master and great senior brother." He had heard by Jiansong once say that it was possible that Master Tibetan Star Sun and great senior brother Huang Wuji were coming back because of him. He did not expect that the past 3 months of radio silence ended at this very critical moment. However, with the presence of the Tibetan Star Sun, he could finally let out a sigh of relief. Although it was his first time seeing the Tibetan Star Sun, this did not prevent Yi Shiwen from being grateful to him. Huang Wuji nodded to Yi Shiwen with a smile. He was always very optimistic about this young disciple. He thought that maybe this young disciple was sent by the gods to revive their Tibetan Star Summit. Otherwise, how could he instantly repair their Tibetan Star Sutra that their people had been pursuing for many years? Tibetan Star Sutra, the supreme technique of the Tibetan Star Summit, was the root of all the martial arts of the Tibetan Star Summit. Without the Tibetan Star Sutra, the Tibetan Star Summit could not be considered complete. Hence, the Tibetan Star disciples throughout the years were basically immersed in that chaotic battlefield all year round, looking for the Tibetan Star Sutra that might have been left behind by their predecessors. As a matter of fact, the battlefield was not a peaceful place, but an extremely dangerous place. Even the previous heads of the Tibetan Star Summit had fallen in there, almost breaking the legacy. Since then, the head of the Tibetan Star Summit must first accept a disciple and guide the disciple to a very high level, so that he himself could go to the battlefield without worry. Although it could be considered very rewarding, It was not the original intention, as the Tibetan Star Sutra was not found. Now they did not need to go look for it anymore, because the Tibetan Star Sutra had been completed, and might even be more complete than the original version. Even he achieved a breakthrough in the realm that he couldn't achieve for a long time because of Yi Shiwen. He overwhelmed his old opponent Mu Xingjie with one move. This was all brought upon by Yi Shiwen, so he always felt that Yi Shiwen was sent by the gods to the Tibetan Star Summit. The Tibetan Star Sun looked at Yi Shiwen with a complex facial expression. This young disciple who he had not met yet was different from the other legacies that were divided into many factions. To the Tibetan Star Summit that only had one soul heir for many years, any disciple who came forward was his disciple. He only knew that he had such a disciple a few decades ago, but he never took it to heart, just like Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin. However, he didn't expect that he would be an extraordinary genius that was not inferior to Huang Wuji. No, he had even more innate talent than Huang Wuji. At the very least, Huang Wuji was not as impressive as Yi Shiwen when he was Yi Ziwen's age. Perhaps it was like Huang Wuji said, he was really sent by the gods to the Tibetan Star Summit people. However, his gaze only stayed on Yi Shiwen for a while. He said, "No need for such courtesy." The Tibetan Star Summit did not put much emphasis on courtesy. After all, there were only so few people in total. It was not realistic to strictly divide ranks. The Tibetan Star Sun's eyes looked deep into the universe, in the direction of true martial school. After a short while, a middle-aged man clad in traditional Chinese clothing stepped forward. He was different from the Tibetan Star Sun's calm temperament. This was an overbearing, powerful man. His gaze was as sharp as a knife. Wherever he went, everyone retreated, showing his strength. This man was none other than the law enforcement hallmaster, Shi Daoling. Chapter 710. A blessing in disguise. Shi Daoling had a vigor completely different from the Tibetan Star Sun. From all everywhere, it had a spirit of disdain, and in the position of power, the Tibetan Star Sun could never raise this type of vigor. On average, a person's temperament was related to their life experience. Shi Daoling was the law enforcement hallmaster of true martial school. He bore great responsibilities. Among the many masters of the true martial school, only a few of them were on an equal level with him, let alone in terms of influence. Along with wielding the power to enforce law for a long time, only then this kind of vigor could be produced. However, despite the Tibetan Star Sun being powerful, and was considered as excellent within the inner realm of the true martial school, the waning of the Tibetan Star Summit had been going on for many years. There were very few of them. Even with the disciples serving the Tibetan Star Summit were taken into account, it was not many at all. What's more, he had the hands-off management style, and could not be bothered with the affairs. Naturally, he could not cultivate a powerful vigor, but the vigor had a somewhat placid and faintly discernible overtone. These two vigors were completely different from one another, and even the people could not differentiate both of them. Shi Daoling arrived in stride. He was full of vigor, compared to the invisible vigor of the Tibetan Star Sun. Both of their vigors were in great contrast. "I was not expecting your return. Rumor has it that some time ago, you have the complete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra, but the rumor turned out to be true, is it?" Shi Daoling seemed a little surprised after he looked at the Tibetan Star Sun. The Tibetan Star Summit was already frightening even with the incomplete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra, let alone Huang Wuji, who had studied the complete version of the Tibetan Star Sutra. Huang Wuji's capability would be immediately known after he engaged in a battle with Mu Xingjie. The Tibetan Star Sun nodded with a calm expression, and said, "Now, it's time for me to understand the matter of you hurting my disciple. I heard that your people from the law enforcement hall are very active during my absence." Naturally, what the Tibetan Star Sun said was that they repeatedly caused trouble for Yi Shiwen. He had known of this matter. However, his silence was not out of being unaware, but rather he had not been able to find a suitable time to talk about this matter. Unexpectedly, Shi Daoling just nodded his head, and did not even deny such a matter at all. He just looked at the Tibetan Star Summit without giving in and said, "It's just to knock some sense into him. It is inappropriate for him to show off his ability at such a young age." Naturally, I have my own method to educate my disciple. It is not up to you to decide on it. Now you have injured my disciple. Your law enforcement hall will need to pay for some of the resources that will be needed to treat my disciple when the time comes. The Tibetan star sun let out a cold sneer and said coldly while being resolute and decisive on this matter without making hasty judgments on Sherdaling. Sherdaling did not refute but agreed to this proposition. Everyone knew about his idea. He had planned to take action before the Tibetan star sun's homecoming. However, since this goal was not achieved, there was no need to pester with this matter endlessly. It was already good for this matter to be concluded in such a peaceful manner. Everyone looked forward for the two men insulting and bickering with each other. However, it was no more than both of them using only a few words to end the matter. Mu Xingjie, who suffered a big loss in this matter, did not receive any compensation. On the contrary, it was reckoned that Yi Shiwen would receive a lot of compensation. However, come to think about it, from the beginning, the law enforcement hall did not handle this matter on a moral high ground. Afterwards, Sherdahling's interference made the law enforcement hall even more passive on this matter. The most significant matter at this time was to calm the Tibetan star sun's fury. However, both of them belonged to the true martial school after all. It was impossible for them to engage in a violent battle against each other. Both of them were not merely great sages but masters in transcendent realm. A social upheaval would occur should a battle break out between two transcendent realm masters. Such a battle would be 100 times or 1,000 times worse than a hostile battle in the great sage realm. Mu Xingjie, who was on the side, was slowly recuperating. More than half of the injuries inflicted on his body was recovering. Although he still looked like a sorry figure, it was nothing serious. At this time, he just stood beside Sherdaling with an ashen complexion. His face was showing that he was not reconciled to the ending of the matter. He was a person with a formidable strength. Since he joined the true martial school, he was always considered as an exceptional genius among the eyes of everyone. Now such an exceptional genius suffered a big loss here. He had suffered a big loss at Yi Ziwen's hands. The loss of the halo of his body had caused the legendary imprints on his body to fade away. Everyone found out that he was no more than just an ordinary person. Now he had become an accessory to bring out Yi Ziwen's glorious, outstanding and formidable identity. Facing Huang Wuji head-on was something that he finds unacceptable. If he was facing Yi Shiwen, it is just a normal level of shame. He would be really ashamed to the maximum when he was facing Huang Wuji. He and Huang Wuji had been rivals since a long time ago. It was unknown how long the rivalry between them had lasted. He even forgot the reason why both of them became hostile to each other. All he knew was that they had been competitors since a long time ago. It was not once or twice that a competition had occurred between both of them. In general, it was hard to distinguish who was superior as both of them were equally matched. Had it not been Huang Wuji receiving the Tibetan Star Sutra, which was fully recovered by Yi Shiwen and surpassed him with just one move, the competition between them may continue on until they become transcendent realm masters, becoming rivals for generations to come. Therefore, it was because of this reason that he was even more reluctant to face Huang Wuji now. He could accept losing to Yi Shiwen, but losing to Huang Wuji would be unacceptable for him. Although he did not lose to Huang Wuji now, his pathetic state was obvious to Huang Wuji. For him, how could humiliation be summarized? There were mixed feelings in his heart. Put your head up. You just lose in one round of battle. It was nothing at all. He heard Sherdaling's voice instead. Those wise words surged into Mu Xingjie's mind. This made my Xingjie, who was still entangled in this matter, snapped out immediately. It seems that you are too successful all along. The long pathway to martial arts has just begun. Failure is nothing. The real failure is those who cannot get up after the defeat. If you do not have the ability to bear this, then you should just give up on martial arts and go into seclusion. Sherdaling said mercilessly and honestly. However, every one of these words knocked some sense into Mu Xingjie, waking him up. Even Yi Shiwen, who was next to him, repeatedly looked bewilderedly at Sherdaling. He did not expect him to say such a thing. As expected, he proved himself to be the law enforcement hall master. Like the saying, excessive strength gives easy access to fracturing. Whether it was Mu Xingjie or Huang Wuji, Their debut was too smooth. Since their debut, they had been the formidable geniuses anticipated by others. Hence, regardless of how they performed on the outside, there was an exceptional sense of pride in their heart. This pride permeated into their bone marrows. However, this pride was accumulated by their countless victories. If they continued to win, they might not be aware of it. However, they were likely to collapse once they faced failure. The moral pillars that support their mentality were crushed by someone else. Of course, they would not be able to get up. On the contrary, it was a different story for Yi Shiwen. He did not have that kind of indifferent pride. All he had was not something he was born with or given to him by others. It was something that he had to obtain bit by bit through his efforts. Hence, he could accept setbacks. It was not that he had never encountered the tragic situation of being nearly killed by someone else. On the contrary, he often encountered such situations. Hence, he was even clearer than anyone else. This was because the geniuses that were annihilated in his hands tend to collapse in such a manner. Once the main pillar that supported their entire mentality was crushed, they could no longer get up from their setbacks. Even Huang Wuji, who was on the side, became deep in thought after hearing such words. Although he and Mu Xingjie were rivals for many years, the one who understood him the most was his own rival. He understood Mu Xingjie's situation very well. To a certain extent, he and Mu Xingjie were alike. The only difference was that he had not been defeated by others. Now he could even imagine how horrible the situation would turn out to be if he were to be defeated. The situation where all of one's beliefs and pride being crushed was unfathomable. For him, these words also touched his heart. If he faced this situation, what would he do? Mu Xingjie was flushed red, completely showing the expression of shame for the first time, and said, "Sorry, master. I have let you down. I will pull myself together. It's just a minor setback, right? No big deal." Shi Daoling was pleased when he saw that Mu Xingjie understood his words quickly. Was Mu Xingjie stupid? No, he was not stupid at all. On the contrary, he was still a formidable genius who was the chosen one out of the 10,000. Otherwise, he would not be able to get to where he was now. However, it was because of this that he was unimaginably stubborn. He firmly believed that he was right. So, even though he was wrong, it was hard for him to change. Now, it was all thanks to Yi Shiwen that he was able to change his perception so quickly. His battle with Yi Shiwen had greatly upset him. For him, this battle was equivalent to eliminating the entire world. Everything was destroyed by Yi Ziwen's attack. Hence, it was much easier to rebuild his belief than before. When he thought about this, Shi Daoling was very satisfied. How much did a minor setback matter? As a martial arts expert, who would dare to proclaim that they had never encountered a setback? However, the losers were those who could no longer pull themselves together once they failed. A genuinely strong man would pick themselves up together after repeated failures. Although Mu Xingjie had lost his unbeaten winning records this time, he managed to reconstruct his determination in mastering martial arts. From this aspect, he had gained something valuable. Even if he had to compensate the Tibetan Star Summit with some supplies, it was nothing. Compared with the gain, what he had to sacrifice was nothing. Huang Wuji, don't get elated too soon. I will still challenge you. Mu Xingjie unexpectedly looked at Huang Wuji, without ever forgetting his old rival, Huang Wuji. I am waiting for your challenge. Huang Wuji looked at Mu Xingjie indifferently, and did not seem to take him seriously. But you are no match for me now. 5 years. I will give you 5 years. Once you polished up your skills, we will definitely have a battle. Chapter 7:11. A huge debate. Huang Wuji didn't take the current Mu Xingjie to heart, and bluntly pointed out that the current Mu Xingjie was not his opponent. Mu Xingjie might only be worthy to attend a battle 5 years later. In his mind, Mu Xingjie was maybe one of the very few people to be able to contend with him. Perhaps it was lucky to have such a rival for so many years. If it was in the past, Mu Xingjie might be provoked long ago, as he would never admit that he was not as good as Huang Wuji. However, he had to admit that he was worse than Huang Wuji now, but he did not take it to heart, as this was just a temporary gap. In 5 years, he would definitely be able to improve to the point of defeating Huang Wuji. Both of them had intense fighting intentions in their eyes. It is time to end it. It is time to end this battle which has lasted for thousands of years. They did not want to continue the battle in the transcendent realm. As for Yi Shiwen, Mu Xingjie just glanced at him lightly without saying anything. He had a mixed feeling. Although Mu Xingjie had an all-around change in his state of mind because of this battle, he still didn't like Yi Shiwen. However, he couldn't say anything threatening. Mu Xingjie was just a defeated opponent. If he still said anything threatening to Yi Shiwen at this time, wouldn't he, the defeated, looked more ridiculous? But this did not mean that he had conceded defeat. As time passed, he would return sooner or later. Furthermore, Mu Xingjie also knew that Yi Shiwen might have used some secret techniques to become so powerful now. There would be a time where he would be able to fight with Yi Shiwen again sooner or later. Since this matter is over, we will go back first. Shi Daoling did not linger around further. He carried Mu Xingjie, who was rather battered but more spirited, and returned to true martial school directly. Yi Shiwen and the other two did not stay any longer. Shortly after they left, they got on the glimmer of light and landed at Tibetan Star Summit. There was stillness in the universe. Everyone still seemed to be in the battle just now. It seemed that they never thought that this battle that attracted much attention would end like that. No one expected it. Whether it was Mu Xingjie's strength at the beginning, or Yi Ziwen's soaring rise and strength later on, they all watched to their heart's content. It was like sitting on a roller coaster, going to heaven and hell every now and then. Anyway, they knew that Yi Shiwen was about to rise. It didn't matter the amount of people speculating the type of stimulating secret technique that Yi Shiwen used to achieve this level, and even defeated Mu Xingjie in the end. The fact that he defeated Mu Xingjie was an undeniable reality. A segment of historical legend ended today. It was about to turn a new page to start a new legend. An unprecedented legend. It was just a few decades since Yi Shiwen entered true martial school, and he actually did something that shocked the 4 honor seats. How could this not shock everyone to the core? The news of Yi Ziwen's final victory in Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie's century matchup spread like a wildfire throughout the entire true martial school overnight. It immediately sparked off a huge debate. How is this possible? Brother Mu is an invincible master in the great sage great perfection realm. What capabilities does Yi Shiwen have that he can actually defeat Brother Mu? This is impossible. Many people simply did not believe this result. In their impressions, Mu Xingjie had been exceptionally strong in the past hundreds of years. Only a handful of people like Huang Wuji could belittle and provoke him. If Mu Xingjie lost to Huang Wuji, it was more believable, and everyone would accept it quickly. After all, Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji had fought for countless years. Although they had yet to have a real decisive battle against each other, they were regarded as almost on par with each other. Hence, it was possible that any one of them would win as a result of the battle. But Yi Shiwen was definitely not included among these people. It was not that Yi Shiwen was unknown. On the contrary, he was very famous. In terms of fame and recent spotlight, perhaps no one could compare with Yi Shiwen. But fame and strength was not the same thing at all. Everyone did not deny Yi Ziwen's innate talent. They were of the opinion that Yi Shiwen could be on par with Mu Xingjie and Huang Wuji sooner or later, but that was in the future. It might also be a matter of the next few hundred years, but definitely not now. So when this happened, countless people were extremely shocked and found it unbelievable. Sure enough, Yi Shiwen won. I have said before, the depth of Yi Ziwen's strength is unfathomable. Although I don't know what martial techniques he used, he must have the confidence to win since he clearly challenges Mu Xingjie. Some people also declared that they were very optimistic about Yi Shiwen from the start, and proudly bragged everywhere to show their foresight. This Yi Shiwen used 2 secret techniques consecutively in this battle. Everyone knows the ramifications of secret techniques. Yi Ziwen's secret techniques are so powerful, so the ramifications are likely to be too big to an unbearable extent. Perhaps Yi Shiwen is crippled now. Many people were also speculating whether Yi Shiwen was crippled because of the use of secret techniques. No matter what, a new segment of legend is about to rise today onwards. I do not know whether it is a good or bad thing for our true martial school, especially in this eventful period. Some older generation masters lamented that they watched Mu Xingjie go step by step to legendary status, But now they also watched this legend destroyed. It was difficult to explain such a mixed feeling. Nevertheless, it was undeniable that there would be a brand new legend and myth rising gradually after this battle. The result of this battle had even alarmed some old masters in close cultivation. It was not that Yi Shiwen had such influence, but Mu Xingjie had such influence because he was the next law enforcement hall master. In other words, he was one of the top levels of the true martial school by default. Any of his actions could attract the attention of the top level of the true martial school, not to mention such a huge defeat. How could it not attract the attention of countless people? It was also the same for even these old freaks who had been in close cultivation all year long. Yi Shiwen, who caused a huge turbulence outside, was in the main hall of the Tibetan Star Summit. Due to the return of Tibetan Star Sun, everyone at the Tibetan Star Summit came together. Even Lu Yanlan, who was in close cultivation, had come out. The return of Tibetan Star Sun was an important matter after all, so she had to come out. It was not that she was in a close cultivation that she couldn't get out of. Everyone came forward to greet Tibetan Star Sun one by one, and stood beside him. Tibetan Star Sun glanced at his 6 disciples, and there was a trace of pride in his gaze. The weakest among his 6 disciples, Yang Wenjun and Deng Shuixin, were also Sage Realm Masters, and were able to assume responsibilities independently. Not to mention the first 3 disciples who all stepped into the Great Sage Realm. Especially the new 6th disciple, Yi Shiwen, who gave him a huge surprise. He didn't expect that the Tibetan Star Sutra, which had troubled Tibetan Star Summit for countless years, was solved during his leadership period. Of course, it was Yi Shiwen who solved the problem. He can actually comprehend the full version of Tibetan Star Sutra. Isn't this the blessings from the ancestors' spirits of the past? The most important thing was that his innate talent seemed to be stronger than his great disciple, Huang Wuji. In just a few decades, Yi Shiwen could actually step into the half-step great sage without any pointers. He even used the secret techniques to beat Mu Xingjie, who was well known in the school. This was beyond his expectations. After returning to Tibetan Star Summit, Yi Shiwen swapped out his actual body in replacement, while the others were not paying attention to him. On the other hand, he kept Star Beast Avatar in Tianyuan Mirror to cultivate. The Blood Slave had completely merged with the Star Beast Avatar now. In other words, the Blood Slave had really become the spirit of the Star Beast. It was no longer like the past where he could only summon its physical body. Of course, it would take some time to fully receive the legacy and fully exert the powerful fighting power of the Star Beast. It would also take a lot of time to slowly explore and refine the many secret techniques and innate magical powers of the Star Beast clan. All these would need some time. If the Blood Slave had already done this previously, it would not be so hard to beat Mu Xingjie. In fact, it would probably be many times simpler. This was a Star Beast after all. The adult Star Beast directly led to true martial school's decline. Although this was just a young Star Beast, its strength was still unimaginable. Yi Shiwen could only rely on his powerful physical body to battle previously. After all, even if he had the many Star Beast clan's magical powers and secret techniques, it was impossible to use them in that battle. Outsiders thought that Yi Shiwen had to rely on some secret techniques to defeat Mu Xingjie. He also wanted to create such an impression intentionally where it really seemed like he just depended on some secret techniques, instead of his real strength. Compared to being ridiculed about this, he was even more unwilling to expose everything related to Star Beast Avatar. Just like the secret of Yi Zaiwen's demon wings, he couldn't let anyone realize this secret. It was alright to be regarded as his secret technique. This way, not many people would really explore the underlying reason. After all, everyone knew that the secret method was related to the true secret of a warrior. Therefore, no one would look into it unless they wanted to become his enemy. Tibetan Star Sun smiled smugly. Although there were not many people in Tibetan Star Summit now, it could be said that there were a large number of talents. If it was not because of the recent uproar caused by Emergence School's attack on True Martial School, Tibetan Star Summit's plan to revive could really be activated. Then Tibetan Star Summit could open its gates and accept a big number of disciples. The reason he came back from the extraterrestrial battlefield had a direct relationship with this matter. This matter was related to the life and death of true martial school. He couldn't ignore it. Chapter 7:12. An opportunity to quickly increase strength. The current situation was not suitable for the implementation of the revival plan. It would not be implemented at least until Emergent School's attack came to an end. Now that Emergent School's upcoming attack had become a consensus for everyone, True Martial School was also preparing for the upcoming invasion of Emergent School. No one knew how the Emergent School would attack and what violent storm it would bring. In such situations, the Tibetan Star Summit's revival plan could only be put aside first, so that they could go all out to deal with the upcoming Emergent School attack. Everyone had a relaxed smile on their faces, as if the Emergent School's upcoming attack was already resolved. This was none other than because the Tibetan Star Sun was back. With such a terrifying transcendent realm ace at the helm, they felt confident and prepared. Even if Emergent School really invaded, they already had the best guarantee. A transcendent realm powerhouse was an undefeated ace wherever he went in this world. Everyone did a great job in my absence, Tibetan Star Sun said with a smile. Yi Shiwen, your grievances with the law enforcement hall must be put aside first. The priority now is none other than facing the Emergent School's attack. Tibetan Star Sun looked at Yi Shiwen, and Yi Shiwen nodded. He knew the importance of the moment Emergent School would attack. He understood what mattered and what didn't. In the eyes of others, the news that Emergent School was about to invade seemed more like just a possibility. However, for Yi Shiwen, it wasn't just a possibility, but something that was about to happen. Something that would definitely happen. From the actions of Bloodwolf Plunderer, he could infer that Emergent School's attack was about to happen, and would definitely happen. Yi Shiwen didn't want to invoke internal conflict at this time precisely for this reason. Therefore, he wanted to understand the grievances with law enforcement halls before that happened. Hence he invited Mu Xingjie to a battle. Otherwise, why would he rashly invite Mu Xingjie to a battle when he didn't have complete assurance? It was so that when he fought Emergent School, nothing would go wrong. Seeing Yi Shiwen nod, the Tibetan Star Sun did not say much. He believed that Yi Shiwen was able to clearly distinguish the situation at the critical time. The reason why I rushed back this time is largely because of the news that Emergent School was about to attack. The Tibetan Star Sun's facial expression became serious. I can tell you that the Emergent School's upcoming attack is not just a possible inference, but a reality, something that will become true soon. The senior executives have already received some news that confirmed that Emergent School is about to attack. Thus, during this time, everyone should be extra careful. Don't go out unless you have to. Tibetan Star Sun's words suddenly made everyone nervous. Even Huang Wuji was no exception. Although he was already a great sage, great perfection master, as long as he was not a transcendent realm master, he did not have the ability to dominate the other party. In True Martial School and Emergent School, where formidable giants meet, Great Sage seemed far too minuscule, unable to kick up any waves. Only a transcendent realm master could lead a battle, but only lead it. To completely control the battle was simply impossible. This was true even for Huang Wuji, not to mention others. Now the entire southern region, even the entire True Martial domain was not safe. Staying in True Martial School was the safest, although True Martial School would definitely be the main force of the opponent's attack. However, within True Martial School, they had operated the base for many years. Naturally, they were superior in some aspects, a few of them being arrays. They had many powerful arrays that might not be good for offense, but advantageous for defense. Therefore, even in True Martial School's weakest, most dangerous period, this True Martial Mountain had never been broken by anyone before. Several people nodded their heads, agreeing. Yi Shiwen was only a little worried about his parents and relatives who were still in the Great Yu Empire. Although he knew that Emergent School probably would not destroy such an inconspicuous force like the Great Yu Empire Yuan sect. Because what Emergent School wanted to defeat or even eliminate the root, that would be True Martial School. Once the True Martial School was overpowered, defeated or even wiped out, the remaining small forces would naturally surrender and become Emergent School's right wing. So they probably wouldn't harm them. It was not that these small forces were too powerful, but that they did not have a big sect, or great wealth like those huge legacies, so they were easily swayed. The secret to their survival was just following the direction of the wind. However, Yi Shiwen couldn't guarantee that emergence school did not have people who would go after the small forces out of boredom. If there was, he was afraid that he would regret it. Thinking of this, Yi Shiwen decided to write them a letter when the time came to ask them to hide first and lay low for now. Whether true martial school or emergence school emerged victorious, he would say more when the results were out. Most importantly, even if the true martial school won in the end, it might attract the siege of other forces in the true martial domain. They had been coveting the South region for a long time, and were eager to kill the old master, true martial school, so another turmoil might happen at the end. A war-ridden era was approaching. Yi Shiwen, this is a good opportunity. Yimo's voice suddenly said. Now that emergence school is about to attack, true martial school is selectively retracting forces. Hence, the extraterritorial battlefields that are wreaking havoc in Tian region should be lacking powerful master now. If you apply for a transfer, you probably won't be rejected. Yimo's voice interrupted Yi Ziwen's thoughts and made him a little puzzled. If there was anyone in this world who did not want him to die, Yimo was definitely the vehement one. Now staying in the true martial school was undoubtedly the safest. Why would he go to the extraterritorial battlefield? Although that place was not directly above true martial school, it should not be on the main route of the emergent school's attack. However, even if it was on the secondary route, it might be a disaster for him. Although he could have the strength of the Great Sage Realm Great Perfection after summoning Star Beast Avatar, just like Huang Wuji's concerns, in the collision between the forces that were on the level of formidable giants, his strength was not enough. If he really bumped into them, he was afraid he would be wiped out. Seemingly knowing Yi Ziwen's doubts, Yimo continued. In this world, the greatest security guarantee is not any array nor is it relying on powerful people, but your own strength being powerful enough. Yi Shiwen could understand. He nodded. As the saying went, it was better to rely on oneself than others. If you have the strength of the transcendent realm, then you have the capital for offense and defense in this turmoil, said Yimo. But my actual person is not even a great sage, much less transcendent realm. I might not necessarily be able to enter the transcendent realm within 1,000 years. Yi Shiwen said in his mind. Although he was very confident in the future of his martial arts, being confident did not mean blind arrogance. He knew his current condition. According to the current speed of cultivation, even if he had the violet limitless chi pellet, he would still need some time for him to achieve a breakthrough to become great sage. Never mind the transcendent realm. If he was able to enter the transcendent realm within 1,000 years, he would already find it very fast. There is no way I can make it before this battle. Your actual person may not be able to keep up with the transcendent realm, but don't forget, the Star Beast Avatar has a chance right now. He is already a great sage, great perfection. Even if he is only promoted to the half-step transcendent realm, your room for maneuvering would become a lot bigger, said Yimo. Even so, it's impossible. At the speed of Star Beast Avatar's cultivation, I don't know how many years it would take to enter the transcendent realm, Yi Shiwen said while shaking his head. Even if the Star Beast Avatar was able to cultivate because he was fully merged with the Blood Slave now, even if he was already a great sage, great perfection, it was still very difficult to take this step. If he did not have any special encounters, only ground away time, a few hundred, 1,000 years would pass by quickly. It was nothing. In actuality, those who could rise to transcendent realm within 1,000 years were already considered very powerful, just like Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie, who had been hailed as rare geniuses. So there is a chance now, Yimo said halfway, but was interrupted by Yi Shiwen. You mean the adult star avatar that has been sealed? Yi Shiwen immediately knew what Yimo was thinking. He immediately drew a breath. That was a malefic elderly predecessor. One who knocked true martial school at its peak state down to earth. He was an existence that countless true martial school seniors banded together couldn't kill. They could only seal him. Although he said before that he would kill this star beast with his bare hands sooner or later, he never thought about fighting the adult star beast now. Isn't that asking for death? Is it any different from asking for death? So he didn't have such thoughts at all. He only remembered it when Yemo reminded him. You know how dangerous that star beast is. Once released, the entire true martial domain would be destroyed. Yi Shiwen said, shaking his head quickly. But this is the only opportunity you have in front of you. The only way to make the star beast avatar enter the half-step transcendent realm at once. Also, I didn't say release the monster. Yemo said and shook his head. Obviously, he clearly knew what the thing inside the seal meant. One malefic, a Chinese belief that a certain someone is the curse of a person as though he is the person's natural nemesis that will bring disasters to the person. Chapter 713 The idea of fighting an adult star beast. Once the star beast was released, what awaits would be an overflowing calamity in the sky. The true martial domain might even be destroyed by it. But this is the only way, said Yemo, with your current strength and status. If you are going to take up a post at the extraterritorial battlefield, your words will have an enormous weight and you will be in a position of power. That way, you will have a chance. The extraterritorial battlefield was not particularly a place of significance. Abandoning that place would have literally no effect on other aspects. However, a giant beast that could bring destruction to the world was sealed in that place. Hence, this place had become a dilemma. It was hard to decide whether it was needed to defend that place. At this time, if Yi Shiwen asked to guard that area, the people in the faction might not agree with his request. The reason was Yi Shiwen played an important role in the faction now unlike in the past. When he first entered the true martial school, his death would not mean anything to the people of the school if he was to participate in the extraterritorial battlefield. In the true martial school, there were at least 800,000 people like him. If one of them, and even if a bunch of them were dead, no one would even bother with it. However, he had shown enough potential that he could compete with Huang Wuji and Mu Xingjie in the future. With such a potential, he was likely to be another expert in the transcendent realm. While the true martial school could withstand the death of 1 million legends, the death of an expert in the transcendent realm was something they could not afford. Although Yi Ziwen's potential to be the expert in the transcendent realm was ambiguous, he was still a person that they could never afford to lose. Hence, once the application went up, it was difficult to obtain a permit. This was the matter that worried Yemo the most. In the true martial school, the great sage had a saying below the middle level. Once a person became a great sage, they could utilize their strength to become a monarch and assume authority in one place. Generally, they would need to defend their spot. Hence, Yi Shiwen was also given the opportunity to defend the extraterritorial battlefield. However, this also posed a very difficult problem. But, how do you plan on doing it? Yi Shiwen asked. He did not know what Yemo was planning on doing. I intend to borrow the power of this star beast. They all belong to the same bloodline. I have a magic skill which I can use to extract the power of the flesh and blood of the adult star beast. This will allow the star beast avatar to break through quickly, said Yemo. Yi Shiwen frowned. To say that this kind of magical skill was rare was incorrect. In the demon-worshipping religion, even individuals of the depraved religion were capable of such skill. However, even if they were capable of doing so, there were typically very few people who would choose this method. There was a simple explanation behind it. This was because there was a hidden yet huge danger of this skill. In the short term, practitioners would be able to make rapid progress. However, there would be a great hidden danger in the future. Hence, the depraved religion was not able to successfully excel under the stars. Since there were hidden and great dangers that came with this martial arts technique, there were rarely experts from the depraved religion. Are there no ramifications for such martial techniques? Yi Shiwen asked. Although it was not a person, he still valued Star Beast Avatar. If there were any serious ramifications, then he might as well not want it. The Star Beast Avatar would be playing an important role in Yi Ziwen's plan in the future. Hence, it must not be crippled in such a manner. There will definitely be ramifications. Yemo told the cold truth. After all, this world is fair. The benefits one received was based on how much one put in their efforts. Despite this cheap trick enabling one to enter the realm swiftly, the ramifications were also very deadly. However, it is because they are all star beasts, all the defects that are left behind by the fusion failure are no longer there. Unlike the fantastic oddities of the human race, everyone practiced different martial arts. There were a scarce number of star beasts. Furthermore, a large degree of their cultivation was reliant on the innate talent and magical power of their clan. The martial techniques they cultivated were basically repetitive, so the power they cultivated was of a common origin. Through this manner, it could be quickly integrated into it without any ramifications. This was what Yemo had originally planned. Yi Shiwen thought about it, gritted his teeth and said, "So that's how we will do it." After thinking for a while, he decided to go ahead with Yemo's idea. Since Yemo said this, then he must completely be certain. Otherwise, knowing his character, he would definitely not say out loud. Besides, when the emergent school was about to make a large-scale invasion at this moment, were there any faster and better ways than this to improve its strength? Yemo was right. If the emergent school was going to attack with all their strength, there was a huge possibility that they were going to give it all they got. At that time, the experts of the Transcendence realm would be able to show off their tyrannical power. The great sage would have no abilities to intervene. However, it would be a different story if his improvement reached the half-step Transcendence realm. At that time, his strength would increase greatly. Between advance and retreat, there would be more options to go for. In the realm after the great sage, the half-step Transcendent realm was also divided into 3 stages: initial, intermediate, and late. As for the Transcendent realm, its division was unlike that of the Sage realm and the Great Sage realm, but was directly divided into 9 levels. These were what Yemo told Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, at his current level, it was impossible to reach out to the knowledge pertaining to Transcendent realm. If there were many people in the Great Sage realm, then there were only a few people in the Transcendent realm. The Tibetan Star Sun was probably the only thing that was close to him. However, even this was his first time seeing the Tibetan Star Sun. This also included the other experts of the Transcendence realm, who were rare existences on ordinary days. The only time where ordinary individuals were able to meet such rare existences was when Xiaoya wanted to become an apprentice. It was really like a miracle at that time. Most people were not able to see even one Transcendent realm master in their lifetime. Now all of them appeared in public one after another unexpectedly. However, according to Yemo, despite these experts being in the Transcendent realm, their ranks were relatively low. Most were at rank 1 of the Transcendent realm. However, even so, Yi Shiwen could no longer fight against them. "Master, I want to apply for the transfer to the defense team on the extraterritorial battlefield," said Yi Shiwen. The crowd gave Yi Shiwen a strange glare. They did not know what he was thinking. At this moment when a war was about to break out, everyone was thinking about transferring back to true martial school. Why would he want to be transferred outside instead? Did he not comprehend how dangerous it was at this moment? Why do you want to be transferred outside? The Tibetan Star Sun said to Yi Shiwen. Of course, the true martial school was among the safest places at this time, especially for their Tibetan Star Summit. They only had a few disciples in total. Each of them was precious and they could not lose any of them. Especially Yi Shiwen, the disciple who might reach the Transcendence realm in the future. They even could not afford to lose such a disciple. "I want to go out to lay low. Also, if the emergent school launches an attack here, I can leave as soon as possible. They will not be able to catch up with me," said Yi Shiwen. The Tibetan Star Sun was extremely skeptical towards Yi Ziwen's answer. However, he nodded without even giving it much thought and said, "Okay, I'll help you apply for it." How could he not see through Yi Ziwen's insincere words? However, he did not expose Yi Shiwen. He knew that Yi Shiwen was certainly not a person who was not able to distinguish priorities and personal matters. However, now that he said so, he must have come up with his own ideas. He did not think about this matter deeply. Everyone had their own secrets. The true martial school would never blindly ask everyone to reveal their secrets. This was because doing so was not only unrealistic, but it would also trigger the anxieties of others. Since Yi Shiwen requested, there must be a reason for his compulsory trip. Of course, the most important thing was that he believed in Yi Ziwen's strength. Even if he could not stand against 1,000 troops on his own, he definitely had the strength to escape. Even though he was not in the true martial school, The news was spreading continuously. Naturally, he knew of Yi Ziwen's outstanding performance, about how Yi Shiwen had managed to escape from the clutches of the Soul Destruction Temple Master. Although he did not take the Soul Destruction Temple Master seriously, Yi Ziwen's ability to escape at a disadvantaged situation was undeniably sufficient to prove that his personal strength was indeed extraordinary. Now that his safety could be guaranteed, the other concerns were then insignificant matters. Seeing that the Tibetan Star Sun did not look into the matter in depth, Yi Shiwen could not help but feel relieved. He was a little grateful. Of course, he knew that the Tibetan Star Sun should be able to see that there were some flaws in this plan, but he did not ask anything about it. Instead, he just immediately helped him get things done. All of a sudden, Yi Shiwen had a feeling. It was the feeling of being at home, which was not bad. He had not felt this way for a long time. In the past, when Mountain Qingfeng was divided into different clans, his father, who was an elder, would protect him. However, once he arrived at the headquarters, he had no one to rely on but met with enemies instead. In each step of martial arts, he only relied on his own strength without any external support. His own strength was the only thing he could depend on. Gradually, he forgot the original feeling. There were a lot of things which did not require him to be on the front line. He knew there was a backer that he could rely on. He knew that he could only rely on himself on most things, but it was a lot better to have something to rely on rather than nothing. Several other people saw that the Tibetan Star Sun did not continue interrogating on the matter. Hence, they also stopped pursuing the matter because there was no need to do so at all. They also believed that Yi Shiwen always had his own reasons for doing so. He would not be reckless to let himself be killed. However, if things become out of control, you better immediately retreat, said Bai Jiansong. Among the fellow apprentices, he was the closest to Yi Shiwen. He was the one who adopted Yi Shiwen into the sect from the beginning. After that, he had frequently protected Yi Shiwen. The relationship between the two was far greater than that of others. Hence, it was natural of him to be more caring towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen nodded. Of course, he would not choose to fight recklessly at the cost of his life. With the Tibetan Star Sun taking action, this matter naturally had no suspense and was carried out quickly. Yi Shiwen, who was the rising star of the true martial school, would never be allowed to be part of an external transfer since it was a very dangerous move. However, since it was a personal proposal of the Tibetan Star Sun, no one wanted to go against it. Since his master has even agreed to it, what other reasons were there for others to go against it? After obtaining permission, Yi Shiwen did not hesitate and rushed to the extraterritorial battlefield. Chapter 7:14. Going straight into the sealed site, the extraterrestrial battlefield was still in chaos. The news that Emergence School was about to invade had led to a large number of True Martial School disciples to return to True Martial School, but there were still a lot of courageous disciples who stayed here. Most importantly, this was a heaven for Star Beast. A large number of Star Beasts lived here. Even with the departure of the True Martial School disciples, it was still the same as before. This place did not restore its calmness after the True Martial School disciples left. They were still fighting and killing each other on a large scale. The killing between different clans never seemed to stop at all. The great sage that used to preside here had also returned to True Martial School. Only some Sage Realm warriors still watched over the warriors who were still staying and cultivating here. Many of them were even disciples who were of Yi Ziwen's generation. They were still staying here to cultivate. Unlike Yi Shiwen, whose cultivation had already made rapid progress. In general, it was no longer the same as the peak period. In an ancient city of the extraterrestrial battlefield, some Sage Realm masters guarding here were waiting for Yi Ziwen's arrival. With the departure of the previous great sage, the upcoming Yi Shiwen would become their superior, who would be the master who presided over this area. Compared with Yi Shiwen, they were nothing at all. Although the invasion of Emergence School was imminent, it was still too far away for them. But Yi Shiwen, who was about to take up the new post, was close at hand. Furthermore, the person was not an ordinary great sage, but a superstar like Yi Shiwen. He was a freak who was not a great sage, but could kill a great sage. When he was an ordinary disciple decades ago, He was already able to slash his way to fame in the extraterrestrial battlefield when he killed the first elite-level opponent in his life. Yi Shiwen was already world-renowned from then onwards. The only thing was that he was world-renowned under a disciple identity. But he came as a ruler now. With his status in true martial school and his own strength, he could easily establish his own kingdom. Therefore, many people considered a great sage as a ruler of a kingdom. Although Yi Shiwen was not a great sage, he was no different from other great sages. No one knew why the school's top levels sent such a great killer here. However, they also felt somewhat relieved in the midst of the nervousness. Yi Ziwen's strength fully surfaced after defeating Mu Xingjie. He became a famous young master in the true martial school all of a sudden. Very few disciples could be comparable with him. Perhaps only the top 10 legatee honor seats and mystical people who were not seen but heard during normal days could beat Yi Shiwen. At the moment when Emergent School was about to invade, they would be much safer with such a legendary level master presiding. If Emergent School attacked this place, they would certainly not fight to death here, but they also needed strength in order to escape. If Yi Shiwen presided this place, they felt more at ease than other great sages presiding. There were rumors that Yi Shiwen could only defeat Mu Xingjie by using secret techniques. It was impossible for Yi Shiwen himself to fight against Mu Xingjie. Since the secret techniques were used, Yi Shiwen was probably crippled now. At that time, what did this have to do with them since the top levels had already sent Yi Shiwen? This showed that the so-called secret technique theory and cripple theory were all short-lived. They were simply not reliable. Coming to the extraterrestrial battlefield again, Yi Shiwen was also somewhat in nostalgia. It had been only decades since he left, but the place was completely different now. He also saw acquaintances among these guarding sage realm masters. It was the elite of law enforcement hall, Miaoyu, who had dealt with him before. Miaoyu, who had already reached legend peak at the beginning, had stepped into sage realm and became a master now. Seeing Yi Shiwen coming over, Miaoyu's face was still a little embarrassed. At first, he and Yi Shiwen were considered to be on the same level, but now the gap between him and Yi Shiwen was a world's difference. They were no longer on the same level. At the same time, he was a little nervous. His attitude towards Yi Shiwen was worse than unfriendly previously. He was simply hostile. If he had a chance at that time, he might have killed Yi Shiwen. If Yi Shiwen really wanted to target him now, perhaps even law enforcement hall couldn't protect him. He had also heard of the battle between Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie. Compared with Mu Xingjie, Miaoyu was basically at a far cry from Mu Xingjie. If Yi Shiwen could defeat Mu Xingjie, killing Miaoyu was not a problem at all. Even the law enforcement hall couldn't say anything, because law enforcement hall still owed Yi Shiwen a big favor. The law enforcement hall master, Shi Daoling, attacked but didn't manage to kill Yi Shiwen. Instead, he owed Yi Shiwen a big favor. A lot of things had to be lost at that time. At this time, Miaoyu was prepared to die. He never expected that Yi Shiwen could advance so fast. Yi Shiwen could actually compete with the legendary brother Mu after just a few years. It was simply unimaginable. But fortunately, Yi Shiwen just glanced at everyone and did not keep his eyes on Miaoyu for a long time. Miaoyu had a feeling of escaping from a disaster and was relieved. But Miaoyu also knew that it was probably because Yi Shiwen did not take him to heart anymore. They were no longer characters at the same level. In fact, Yi Shiwen really did not have the heart of avenging Miaoyu. Furthermore, if he did not see Miaoyu again, he had long forgotten that there was such a person. For him, the only purpose of coming to preside over the extraterrestrial battlefield this time was to find the adult star beast, and other past grudges were not important. You all can dismiss now. Don't purposely wait for me. Let someone take me to the beast's sealed site. After a while I will personally preside there. Yi Shiwen said indifferently, and did not further share his thoughts with these people. If he wanted to build his own force here, this was a good opportunity to draw people's hearts. But he was not interested in this at all, and it was meaningless to talk about it at this time. Under the strong blow of Emergent School, all forces were short-lived and seemed very ridiculous. Everyone had no doubts. In fact, the only valuable place in the extraterrestrial battlefield was where the star beast was sealed. This was the most crucial place while the other places were insignificant, and could be abandoned. Since the school had sent people like Yi Shiwen at this most critical time, it must be for this star beast. There could be no other reason that was worth sending Yi Shiwen to take risks. Since Yi Shiwen was not talkative, and directly said that he came for the beast and would not change their current structure, they naturally enjoyed it. Although it was quite a pity that they failed to mingle with Yi Shiwen, it was much better than Yi Shiwen arbitrarily commanding as soon as he came. If Yi Shiwen really did that, they couldn't resist as well. After all, they were really too insignificant compared to a person with great sage-level combat power. They soon sent a person to take Yi Shiwen to Star Beast's sealed site. Although Yi Shiwen had powerful strength, he did not know where the Star Beast's sealed site was. Yi Ziwen's strength was still weak at that time, so it was impossible to know the key opening. The place where he encountered the Star Beast's spirit previously was just a loophole in the sealed site. After that, True Martial School had sealed the place. The person who led the way was none other than Miao Yu. Seeing Yi Shiwen had no intentions to get to the bottom of the past, Miao Yu volunteered to take Yi Shiwen there. Although there had been some grievances, any grievances could be put aside first in the bigger picture after the battle between Yi Shiwen and Mu Xingjie ended, and the upcoming invasion of Emergent School. Under Miao Yu's guidance, Yi Shiwen descended all the way to the bottom of the extraterrestrial battlefield's ground. It was originally a spacious paradise where the star beasts lived. Because of True Martial School's interventions now, barriers were laid down and a huge tunnel was built all the way to the sealed site. Roar. The closer they were to the huge seal, the louder the roar that came from a distance. This was a loud roar, which penetrated through the heart directly, and caused an inexplicable terrible trembling from the bottom of the feet. It was a trembling feeling when mortals faced a peerless beast. The trembling was uncontrollable. Miao Yu, who was beside Yi Shiwen, started trembling involuntarily. He was not really afraid because no matter how fierce the beast was, it was just a sealed beast after all. However, it was an instinct that went straight to the heart. Yi Shiwen was the only one who did not show such a condition. Although he had not reached great sage yet, his spirit had transformed completely. Nevertheless, Yi Shiwen could also feel the huge pressure that struck his spirit. Yi Shiwen suddenly knew that this was the star beast that was sealed here, and it was really terrifying. Not to mention a sage realm master would shiver in fear. Even legends who got too close to it might be shocked to the extent of becoming a fool. This scary beast, which stood at the top of the food chain, was the culprit who caused the once flourishing True Martial School to fall. But Miao Yu did not know this beast's background exactly. After all, this star beast was also a secret in the top level. It was probably difficult for Yi Shiwen to guess if he did not have Yi Mo, an old monster, by his side. If it was divulged, then True Martial School would be in big trouble. This place might not even withstand the demon-worshipping religion's raid, releasing this beast that could destroy the world. These warriors stationed here only knew that there was such a monster. Chapter 7:15. Sudden change after 3 years. As for what kind of monster it was, they didn't know. However, they did know that this monster was very important for True Martial School. Miao Yu didn't follow Yi Shiwen down. If he continued further, with his skills he would probably end up kneeling on the ground. This was not the same as the coercion between the warriors. This was yielding to instincts, the fear a creature at the bottom of the food chain felt about the creature at the top. The entire human race was naturally not considered a creature at the bottom of the food chain. They were definitely one of the most powerful species in the world, but individually, they were indeed not considered very high up. Yi Shiwen was the only one left to go inside. Along the way, there were star beasts circling about, eyeing him covetously. However, with the passages that True Martial School opened with one array after another, they dared not come close, otherwise they would be shaken to death. These arrays were personally developed by True Martial School's Supreme Schoolmaster, who was a transcendent realm powerhouse. Once these star beasts came close, they would be shocked to death. Thus, although they were eyeing Yi Shiwen covetously, none of them dared to get close. However, the deeper he went inside, the more powerful the coercion he felt. Soon, even Yi Shiwen could feel a strong pressure on his body. It was a terrifying pressure, all of which was pressing on Yi Ziwen's body. The more forward he went, the stronger it got. And this was because he had protection of the barrier developed by the Supreme Schoolmaster himself. Otherwise, even he could not get close. After all, he was not even a great sage. No matter how strong he was not a great sage by nature. Even if he was a great sage in front of this star beast, he was too minuscule, not worth mentioning at all. Yi Shiwen now deeply understood that once he reached the second half of the path, it was a struggle to simply walk. Toward the end, Yi Shiwen even had to summon the Star Beast avatar in order to continue walking. It was not that the Star Beast avatar was much stronger than his actual self, but because they were homologous. The invisible coercion suddenly became smaller all at once. There was no longer an overwhelming deterrence from a different species, just the deterrence from the strong to the weak. Yi Ziwen's actual self could only sit down at the limit of what he could take and run observing person scripture to resist. This was also a kind of cultivation. Although it was difficult, it was not necessarily a benefit for Yi Shiwen. Yi Ziwen's Star Beast avatar walked all the way in until he reached the deepest point, but he saw a huge barrier standing in front of him like a mountain, exuding an inexplicable majesty. This was a barrier many seniors of True Martial School worked together to seal, representing True Martial School's strength and level at its peak. On the other side of the barrier, a huge monster lay on its back. There were chains filled with the essence of law penetrated deeply into its flesh, constantly drawing power from it. This power was also used to provide for the barrier outside, which was one of the fundamental energy sources that maintained the barrier for countless years. Without the support of the energy from this monster, the barrier would have been rendered useless. No barrier could work without relying on energy for years. Doing this could not only weaken the power of this star beast, but also increase the power of the barrier, thus killing two birds with one stone. The seniors of True Martial School who sealed it at that time were really quite impressive. Human. From the end of the barrier came a booming, hoarse voice. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a sharp gaze piercing through the barrier. Hee, this is quite interesting. You're just a half-step great sage, yet you managed to get here. It's not easy. You are not easy at all. It's more interesting than that transcendent realm human from some time ago. Yi Shiwen suddenly understood that the voice on the other side of the barrier was the adult star beast. I didn't expect that after so many years, you still have the strength to speak. TSK, sure enough, a star beast is impressive. Yi Shiwen clicked his tongue in wonder. Although he wasn't a master of arrays, he had cultivated to this point, so he did have basic insight. This barrier was really terrifying. If it was him on the inside, he was afraid that he would have turned into a puddle of pus and blood in no time. You actually know me? The star beast was a little confused. It didn't expect this guy who was just a half-step great sage to know its origin. This was not simple. Of course. I am who I am today thanks to you. Yi Shiwen chuckled. He released the restrictions on the demon seed in his body, and suddenly the formidable aura from the demon seed spread out in all directions. Although the demon seed was planted in his actual self, it was still possible to release some aura. You are. The star beast could no longer remain calm. It finally came to his senses. This demon seed was too familiar. This was the demon seed that it planted by splitting off a bit of its own spirit. Ha, the gods really helped me. I didn't expect that my demon slave would actually appear at this time. Ha, the gods really want me to get out of this predicament. True martial domain, true martial domain, true martial domain, I will swallow this damn world. With that, a fierce light flickered in the star beast's eyes. Two rays of red light shot out like two huge red lanterns. It was so happy. The demon seed was planted, which meant that Yi Shiwen was its demon slave, so it didn't have to continue pretending. This was the gods giving it a chance to get out of this predicament. When it first split off its spirit, wasn't it because it had this in mind? Its intention was to develop a slave in True Martial School to rescue it in the future. Unexpectedly, after so many years of losing contact with its spirit, it suddenly appeared. It was really the gods helping it. I can finally leave. The first thing it would do after leaving was to swallow this damn true martial domain. Thinking about feasting on the universe, It pondered upon him when was the last time he did it. Never mind eating the world. It even got sealed in this world for many years, and now it could finally leave. Even for a star beast, a species with a long life expectancy, this period of time was also considered extremely long. Now I can finally leave. You're overthinking. Yi Shiwen sneered. When did I say I would let you out? Yi Shiwen instantly suppressed the aura from the demon seed. At this time, the star beast finally reacted. This wasn't right. He could suppress the aura from the demon seed, which meant that something was wrong from the beginning. Something must have happened to the spirit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this. I am here today all thanks to you. Yi Shiwen said coldly. This was not a lie. Without the spirit of this adult star beast, he would not have been able to control the underage star beast and overcome the many dangers that followed. Don't think that anyone came to rescue you. That is simply impossible. Yi Shiwen said with a sneer. When he thought of the demon seed, the fury in his heart grew. With that, he didn't have the desire to continue speaking. He sat directly in front of the barrier and kneaded various scriptures, forming a huge array around his body. The array actually merged into the entire barrier little by little. Suddenly, uncountable power was drawn from the barrier and channeled into his star beast avatar. Although he only drew a little bit of power, the power of this adult star beast was so huge, the energy drawn into the barrier was also very large. Even if it was just a little, to him, it was like an insurmountable master was channeling a large amount of power into his whole body. These arrays were the ones Yi Mo taught Yi Shiwen. They were used to perform a demonic skill to absorb all the energy, essence and blood into the star beast avatar. At that moment, the star beast finally realized that something was amiss. The pathetic human in front of it actually used the power from the barrier to absorb the power from its body to help himself break through. The star beast was shocked and angry at once. It didn't expect the situation to turn out this way. Instead of being able to get out of this predicament, it continued to become someone else's source of nourishment. For a proud and arrogant star beast, it was hard to accept. Roar! At the other end of the barrier, the adult star beast was ablaze with fury. It roared continuously, spewing all kinds of divine light from its body, but all of it was absorbed by the barrier, and a part of it was absorbed by Yi Shiwen's star beast avatar. It did not affect Yi Shiwen in any way. Yi Shiwen paid no attention to it. He did not care about this star beast's anger right now. Because of this star beast, he ended up getting this troublesome demon seed that he couldn't get rid of. It was just like a time bomb. It could explode at any time. Now he was just collecting a little bit of interest. He could feel the demon seed in his body growing every moment, so he could only grow stronger faster than the growth of the demon seed. Otherwise, it would become impossible to suppress this increasingly powerful demon seed. He had no other choice. Directly ignoring the roar of the adult star beast, Yi Shiwen kept kneading the scriptures, exercising the demonic skills to absorb the power of the adult star beast. Sure enough, although there was some repulsion as Yi Mo mentioned, fortunately the power was of the same kind, so it was quickly absorbed and transformed into the star beast avatar's power. With the continuous absorption of this power, the star beast avatar's skills also skyrocketed by leaps and bounds. Yes, not bit by bit, but in leaps and bounds. Initially, with Yi Shiwen's accumulation, entering half-step transcendent realm lacked more than a little, but this power accumulation was the most critical part for Yi Shiwen's star beast avatar to enter the half-step transcendent realm. Now was the critical time where the star beast was about to enter the half-step transcendent realm, and his actual self was about to enter the great sage. Even if he didn't leave, no one would dare to come in and disturb him at this time. Time passed like fine sand through the fingers, one day after another. In a blink of an eye, 3 years passed. Boom! A series of tremendous shocks shook the entire extraterritorial battlefield. Chapter 716. The comprehensive invasion of the emergent school. A series of terrible fluctuations in spiritual energy woke Yi Shiwen up straight from close cultivation. Both he and the star beast avatar were awakened at the same time. However, there was no movement from his star beast avatar. Instead, it closed its eyes and continued to absorb the energy of the barrier. His actual body stood up and walked out to see what happened. He had managed to restrain the fire in his heart altogether. He was almost close to breaking through to the great sage realm. Just when he was planning to swallow the violet limitless chi pellet, a violent vibration suddenly happened outside. Can it be that the emergence school is here? Yi Ziwen's expression suddenly changed at the thought of this possibility. If that was the case, then it would be terrible. The reality was that once the emergence school started to act, it would be an all-around attack. The all-around attack initiated by the emergence school was nothing important, but the main issue was that he was not ready. He had not broken through to the great sage while his star beast avatar had not stepped into the half-step transcendent realm. Both of them were nearly there. All they needed was some more time for both of them to achieve a breakthrough. At that time, even if the emergence school launched their full assault, he would have some ability to protect himself. At least, he would be able to escape from the clutches of the masters of the transcendent realm. When the time came, he would have the option of either launching an assault directly, or to retreat to defend the school. However, now that he had yet to achieve a breakthrough, he was still in trouble. Yi Shiwen had just arrived on the ground and instantly felt the violent fluctuations in the air. Battle cries of the true martial schoolmasters who were stationed here for defending the area were heard from a distance. Everyone, let's leave quickly and immediately retreat back to true martial school. An all-around assault was launched to us by the emergence school. What? The emergence school? A comprehensive assault. Oh God, it actually happened. What should we do? What should we do? We are done for. The emergence school is too terrifying. It's okay. Where we are now isn't facing directly at the school. So, even if the masters of the emergence school come over, they will not focus all of their assaults in this direction. We can all escape. At this time, the current situation could be described as to be in a turmoil and frenetic activity. They no longer had the confidence to defeat the army of the emergence school. At this time, what they had in mind was how would they be able to escape from the clutches of these masters of the emergence school. Yi Shiwen, the emergence school has launched their assault. Yimo's voice reached Yi Ziwen's mind. Yi Shiwen looked at the sky. The entire sky was covered by the clouds. The clouds were full of shadows. Unknown number of masters were lurking in the shadows. Numerous Sage Realm masters were deployed. A blatant proof that the emergence school had deployed their massive army. Otherwise, it was impossible for so many legions to appear. These were not the general disciple of the emergence school. Instead, it was a legion called the Tao Soldiers. The true martial school also had this kind of legion. The same for the Great Yu Empire at that time. The so-called Tao Soldiers were a group of soldiers who were proficient in martial arts and were raised by tyrannical and influential masters. These were no ordinary soldiers. They all possessed superb martial arts skills. Even the most elite corps were composed of the Sage Realm masters. It was conceivable that the damage inflicted by such a group of armies would be immense. They were not ordinary disciples. From the time they were handpicked, they had been fed with various medicinal materials and were taught secret martial arts techniques. They were also being drilled in arrays. All of these trained disciples were trained to become martial art warrior armies, which were meant to be better than the ordinary armies. However, they existed as a group. Tao soldiers who were left alone would never be able to fight against any ordinary disciple of equal power realm. However, in the same way, their potential was completely used up. Their room for improvement for the future was also very small. They would end up exhausting all of their resources in one go when they lose. This could not be compared to genuine disciples. However, every enormous power had raised such Tao soldiers. When it came to conquering a certain big force, it was necessary to rely on such Tao soldiers. The effect was more subtle in a group battle if disciples were deployed instead. In short, the Tao soldiers, which were weapons of mass destruction, were never deployed in a normal melee. Conversely, if the Tao soldiers were really dispatched, then it would become a battle to the end. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes and saw that above the infinite sky, many true martial school disciples were fleeing. Behind them were a group of emergence school disciples. There were a lot of Tao soldiers who were pursuing the true martial school disciples all over the place. Among them, a great deal of great sage's aura was faintly hidden in it. In the beginning, There were a few great sages on the outer battlefield and were not passive. However, the great sages were now being transferred back. Yi Shiwen was the only one left behind. All of this happened when Yi Shiwen was in close cultivation. The true martial school simply did not have the capability of retaliate in the face of their launched assault. However, what Yi Shiwen was confused about was where the assault was being mainly launched at. Hence, even if there were not any great sages of a higher order within the great sage, there were only the great sages of a lower level. Not even the masters of the transcendent realm were in the group. A wave of tyrannical aura flew out from the extraterritorial battlefield. It was from the many sage realm masters who were keeping watch in the true martial school. All of them were startled at once, and were fighting against the emergence school's disciple in a group. However, it was a mystery how they were a match to the emergence school's disciple. This was not due to their suboptimal strength, but that there was a huge gap between the number of people in that group and to the number of people in the emergence school group. Nevertheless, at this time, there was no other way. They must first find some ways to beat the emergence school army to retreat. Then they would have time to escape the place one after another safely. Otherwise, they would be chased around by the opponents to be murdered. When that time came, they would utterly be defeated. Moreover, the most important thing was that this was beyond their imagination. At first, they thought that they were able to make their escape before the arrival of the emergence school. But they did not expect that the emergence school would launch an assault abruptly, which directly tore the space apart. The army suddenly appeared on the extraterritorial battlefield through the teleportation array, which gave true martial school little to no time to make their escape. Anyway, the assistance of these sage realm masters allowed some true martial school legend disciples who were a few times more in number to make their escape and take a breath for a moment. It's over. It's over. We are done for this time. We didn't expect that the masters of the emergence school would immediately appear. We did not even have the chance to escape. I didn't expect that the emergence school had arrived. Their assault came in like thunder. At first, I thought about how to escape only after the emergence school had launched their assault. I now regretted it. Come to think of it, it is really stupid of me. If I am part of the emergence school, there is no way I will give myself time to react too. A sound of anguished wailing was heard among the many true martial school disciples. On normal days, these people were not being highly valued in the true martial school. If they were valued, who would come out to practice their martial arts through toughening up at this time? They had no other choice. Compared with the privileged disciples who were valued by the faction, their martial arts skills had fallen behind severely. They had to make up for it in various ways. However, they did not expect that they would be buried here. Humph! Yi Shiwen let out a cold sneer. In his eyes, countless numbers of the Sage Realm's elders of the true martial school were beheaded continuously. They descended from the sky like dumplings. Finally, he could not help himself but to attack. A grand momentum was released once he launched his attack. His cold sneer was like a large bell and a thunder, making a rumble on everyone's heart. Although he had not broken through the great sage yet, his strength was unquestionable despite being only a half-step great sage. Moreover, during the 3 years of close cultivation, he was really almost there. Just a bit more, and he could break through the great sage realm anytime. His strength had increased not by just a bit, but by a greater amount compared to last time. Miao Yu was struggling to beat back a young captain of the Tao soldier, who was of the level of the sage realm in the emergence school. This was a rather tight situation for him. Although these Tao soldiers were not mindless puppets, they all had their own state of mind. However, they were basically deranged as they sacrificed their corporeal body and tampered with them as though they were weaponry. Within the whole force, they were the most determined group in their will to engage in battle. They were completely dauntless. On the contrary, the general disciples were still hesitating to fight. However, at this time they had no choice but to fight. On the one hand, their opponent overpowered them. On the other hand, the number of opponents was also 10 times or even 100 times that of the true martial school. Furthermore, there were a lot of Tao soldier armies who had not made a single move from far away. There were as many as 2,000 people. Most of them were also from the legend realm. It was unknown how many sage realms and masters of the great sage realm were mixed among them. Despite not being the main force, such a large army was enough to sweep away the entire southern region. From here, it could be seen how powerful the entire emergent school was. Miao Yu was somewhat despaired in his heart. Several powerful Tao soldiers who were of the sage realm level appeared beside him. Each and every one of them emerged victorious from the piles of corpses and waves of blood. None of them were inferior to him. Sha! 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 These overbearing Tao soldiers charged straight towards him to kill him. Bang! Miao Yu was hit directly, flew away and vomited a mouthful of blood. He was seriously injured in an instant, and there was no other way for him to hold on to. It's over. I am about to die. Miao Yu wailed anguishedly in his heart. Every one of these Tao soldiers' masters was not afraid of death. Most importantly, there were too many of them. There was no end to them no matter how many of them he killed. You won't win. When our school gets our own hands free, we will wipe all of you out. Miao Yu let out a sorrowful shriek. Thinking of destroying us? You are way too naive. Today not only will we annihilate all of you guys, we will then launch another assault to the headquarters of your true martial domain after this. In the end, the true martial school will only vanish in a puff of smoke. A contemptuous voice, which was full of disdain for true martial school, emitted from among the numerous number of masters in the sky. Boom! A large rumbling sound was heard and a fiery red big hand grabbed it. The previously rampant Tao soldiers were immediately caught and killed. In the face of this big hand, the ordinary Tao soldiers of the sage realm were just like ordinary ants and were crushed to death. Chapter 717. Is he still a human? Who is it? There was a scream coming from the emergent school's phalanx 1. Even though they were stunned by the sudden change, they didn't take these true martial school disciples seriously at first. According to the information they received, the actual master of true martial school here had already retreated back to true martial school. The rest were some small potatoes who were not worth mentioning at all. If it was not rumored that there was a big secret of true martial school, they would not even come here. Although this army was only a small part of the emergent school's army, it still showed the importance they put on this place. But they didn't know Yi Shiwen was presiding here. Yi Zaiwen's arrival was very low-key, and he didn't alarm many people at all. Hence, their spies didn't get the news at all, but they probably wouldn't be bothered even if they got news about it. For them, a couple of great sages couldn't change the overall situation at all. Of course, it would be a different story if it was a half-step transcendent realm master. This is completely lawless. Yi Shiwen walked all the way to the sky with a black look too. It's Brother Yi. Yay, we are saved. Many disciples' morale was greatly boosted upon seeing Yi Zaiwen's appearance. There was a surprised expression on their faces. They never thought that they could actually see Yi Shiwen appearing here. Following Mu Shengji's defeat, Yi Zaiwen's battle achievements spread throughout true martial school instantly. Although many people were questioning the method he used to defeat Mu Shengji, he was a distinguished master anyhow. Their safety was much greater with him presiding here. Particularly Yi Zaiwen's awesome and thunderous strike just now had boosted everyone's morale. Miao Yu looked at Yi Shiwen thoughtfully. He did not expect that it was Yi Shiwen who saved his life on the verge of death. This was something he had never thought of before. The enmity between Yi Shiwen and Law Enforcement Hall could be said to be very difficult to resolve. He originally thought that Yi Shiwen was kind enough to not delve into the enmity between them in the past, but he didn't even dare to imagine that Yi Shiwen would actually save him. In Yi Zaiwen's mind, it didn't matter which party you were from at this time. They were only true martial school people now, and Yi Shiwen couldn't stand aside when they were in danger. Thank you, Brother Yi, for saving my life. Miao Yu came forward to greet Yi Shiwen. Regardless of the past grievances, it all didn't matter now because Yi Shiwen saved his life this time. Although Yi Zaiwen's time of cultivating martial arts was way shorter than him, he was willing to call him Brother Yi. This is Brother Yi. He is really magnificent. The sharp blow just now killed several soldiers of Sage Realm level. He is really majestic. Yeah, our chances of winning are much greater with him around. We even have higher confidence if we have to escape. Yeah. Whoever dares to say that Brother Yi does not live up to his name, I will beat him up now. This kind of strength is much stronger than us. Yeah, no matter what method he used to defeat Brother Mu, it is like a fight between deities for us. Is there any difference? It is not something we can dig into. Everyone felt relieved after seeing that Yi Shiwen was powerful. Anyway, it was undoubtedly a marvelous thing to be able to have a tyrannical master like Yi Shiwen presiding during this dangerous period. A half-step great sage. Good, good, good. A little half-step great sage even dared to obstruct the advancement of my army. We'll just wipe you out together. I was just worried about not having a decent contribution this time. If I can kill a half-step great sage, it is also a small gain. A cold voice came out from the emergent school army. A Tao soldier had walked out of the army. He was a sturdy Tao soldier who was actually a great sage. Regardless of the identity, the person was mighty if he cultivated to the level of the great sage. The status of Tao soldier couldn't be compared with typical disciples. The former was more like a group of cannon fodder, but it would be a different case when a Tao soldier reached the great sage level. Then he was no different from the real power figures of a normal great sage. Moreover, he was one of the Tao soldier heads leading this particular army. Several powerful great sages' aura was hidden among the crowd behind him, but how could they escape from Yi Zaiwen's eyes? You want to kill me? Yi Zaiwen's gaze was unusually sharp, and he glanced at the Tao soldier head. The Tao soldier head's heart was chilled all of a sudden. He didn't know why there was a tremor in his heart, but he didn't take it seriously. He thought it was nothing but a mere tremor. However, he was flying into a rage out of humiliation. Although no one knew it, he felt quite humiliated. You shall die. Stop acting pretentious in front of me. The Tao soldier head roared and pounced towards Yi Shiwen, waving a spear in his hand. At first, there was a flash of chill which broke the space, and then the spear shot like a dragon straight into Yi Zaiwen's face. A powerful killing technique was delivered in an instant. He also did not know what happened to him. He actually had some fears about a half-step great sage. What is a half-step great sage in the face of a mighty great sage like me? Although half-step great sage was claimed to be able to enter great sage only by half a step, it was a far cry from him as long as Yi Shiwen was not a great sage. There was nothing to be compared at all. The powerful attack instantly broke through the space, punctured the vast sky, and formed a huge black crack. It was a space crack that was constantly mending itself. It directly swept towards Yi Shiwen. Brother Yi, be careful. Miao Yu, who was next to Yi Shiwen, was suddenly shocked and quickly reminded him. The previous enmity was already over. At this time, Yi Shiwen might be the only guarantee for his survival. Hence, how could he not be nervous? But a great sage-level attack was really swift. Miao Yu had just finished reminding him, and the spear had swept to Yi Zaiwen's front in the speed of light. The spear seemed like it would kill Yi Shiwen at once. Yi Shiwen just raised his head calmly, and suddenly moved. His speed was actually faster than the spear. He turned into a giant hand and grabbed the spear directly. Yi Shiwen caught the spear which pierced past his body with his hand. Bang! In the midst of the sonic boom, the giant hand caught the spear and twisted it instantly. The spear, which was refined from unknown metal, was caught immediately and crushed into scrap iron which looked like fried dough twists 3. Everyone from Emergent School's side looked at this scene dumbfoundedly. How is this possible? He is a great sage. Although he is only a great sage intermediate, there is no doubt that he is a great sage indeed. He is one of the heads of the Legion. His weapon is about to become a great holy tool. It is not far different from a great holy tool. This person directly caught it and twisted it into a bunch of scrap iron. What is happening? Only the warriors on the true martial school's side knew what was going on at this time. Although the Yi Shiwen in front of them looked like he was only a half-step great sage, none of them dared to underestimate him. The reason was none other than because this guy with half-step great sage appearance defeated Mu Xingjie of Great Sage Great Perfection Realm. Even Brother Mu of the Great Sage Great Perfection Realm, who they respected like gods in their hearts, was defeated by Yi Shiwen. Meanwhile, this leader was just a great sage intermediate. He was nothing. Yi Shiwen had reached a mystified extent in their hearts. He was enough to compare with the previous Mu Xingjie. How was a great sage intermediate considered anything? Although they were only like ants for the great sage intermediate masters, their spirit had also lifted a lot by following Yi Shiwen. With Yi Shiwen around, a great sage intermediate was really nothing. I will give you back your things. Yi Shiwen smiled. The spear, which looked like scrap iron in his hand, suddenly burst into a powerful light on Yi Ziwen's hand, as if it was reborn in a flash. It was rejuvenated and turned back into a spear. The veins on Yi Ziwen's arm bulged. He threw the spear back in great momentum. Suddenly, a huge beam was launched into the sky. Every inch of the collided space collapsed at once, forming a huge hurricane. It was like a spear dragon, which was extremely terrifying. Everyone stared blankly at the scene in front of them, which was much bigger than the abnormal phenomenon initiated by the Tao soldier head just now. It was as though one shot would destroy the world, putting the world in ruin. The spear had a really terrifying force in Yi Ziwen's hands. It released a wave as great as a great holy tool, and returned to the Tao soldier head instantly with the speed of light and thunderous momentum. The Tao soldier head did not have the strength like Yi Shiwen. He simply couldn't block it at this moment. The spear instantly broke through all the defenses on his body. Puff! A splash of blood gushed out, and the Tao soldier head was directly penetrated by the spear. The horrifying force shattered the internal organs of his body immediately. It pulled the soldier along with its strong inertia and flew out. Bang! The spear directly slammed into the ground, blasting out a vast and deep hole about a dozen miles away. The ground sunk in, forming a huge dent. At the center, the Tao soldier head's body hung obliquely at the end of the spear with his eyes wide open. He couldn't believe that he died so miserably. Moreover, he died without having any power to fight back. There was a pin-drop silence. The wind blew up a bloody atmosphere. Everyone was dumbfounded. Looking at this scene, especially the emergent schoolmasters, they were in disbelief. Chapter 7:18. Don't you even think about leaving today? Is he still human? Everyone, especially those from emergent school, did not expect a half-step great sage to kill great sage. Yi Shiwen? Are you Yi Shiwen? Someone suddenly remembered the main culprit who caused emergent school to attack true martial school, who was the fuse. Although everyone knew that the killing of one great sage directly caused the shocking battle between the two forces, this was basically a huge joke. It was just an excuse. Even so, many people remembered the name Yi Shiwen. Especially since he actually killed a great sage when he was still a half-step great sage. This matter caused a huge stir not just in true martial school, but in the entire emergent school as well. No matter which force it was, such an impressive genius would attract the attention of countless people. Even though they were the enemy, emergent school knew a lot about Yi Shiwen. As soon as they saw such great battle prowess, they immediately recalled it, plus the conversations of the true martial school's disciples just now. With that, they were certain that Yi Shiwen in front of them was the trigger of this war. Ha ha ha, I spent so much effort trying to look for you, but you were easily found in the end. I didn't expect you to be Yi Shiwen. Emergent school has also studied you. As long as I can kill you, I can immediately obtain a lot of wealth. Among the endless group of Tao soldiers, someone said in great arrogance. Tyrannical spiritual senses swept over Yi Shiwen. All of them were wriggling with eagerness to try. In any case, the factor that led emergent school to declare an attack was precisely Yi Shiwen. Whether it was funny or not, this was an unchangeable fact. The reward for Yi Shiwen was also very high, second only to those transcendent realm masters. For these great sages, the transcendent realm masters could be seen but could not be touched. They dared not even come close. Otherwise, the recoil of the battle was enough to shock them to death. However, the situation was different with Yi Shiwen. Despite him having the record of killing a great sage, he was still a half-step great sage in the end who amounted to nothing. Obviously, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen did something astonishing in true martial school recently. He had defeated Mu Xingjie one-sidedly, which shocked people to their core. If one could kill Yi Shiwen, then he would be really rich. Even if it was these great sages, they couldn't help but be enticed by the high bounty on Yi Ziwen's head. Initially, they didn't expect to encounter him so early. After all, A genius of this degree must be well protected, hiding the true martial school, but now he had actually appeared in front of them. This is really a chance given by the gods. In their eyes, the current Yi Shiwen was no longer a person, but a huge treasure. Whoever could kill Yi Shiwen would get a shocking treasure. They could definitely leap to great heights. At that moment, the way Yi Shiwen just destroyed a great sage intermediate master, with one move, was at the back of their minds. They had already forgotten the huge shock Yi Yuan caused for them just now. Only the huge reward was in their minds. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In a blink of an eye, 6 great sages appeared around Yi Shiwen, and all of them were great sage late masters. Among them, there was also a great sage peak master. All of them were eyeing Yi Shiwen covetously, even watching each other with caution, fearing that their bounty would be robbed away. As for Yi Shiwen, they didn't even pay him any attention. Under the siege of the 6 great sage realm masters, and the Tao soldiers in the distance, he could not possibly escape. Yi Shiwen, in their eyes, you are already meat on a chopping board to be butchered, Yi Mo said in a playful voice. Yi Shiwen raised the corner of his mouth. Yet they're so confident that they can defeat me. They even disregard me but guard against each other. And at this moment, Yi Shiwen made a move. He stomped with his feet, tore through the sky like a bolt of golden lightning, and instantly appeared in front of a great sage late master. The great sage late master only saw a golden light flash before he saw that Yi Shiwen had already rushed over. He was suddenly surprised and angry. He had never thought that Yi Shiwen would dare to take the initiative to attack him. In their minds, Yi Shiwen was already a turtle in a jar, and couldn't kick up any more waves. Who knew that Yi Shiwen would immediately prove the other party wrong with his actions? Piss off! The great sage late master roared. He suddenly formed a fist silhouette that almost filled up the sky. Each fist was ablaze as if the stars were falling down in front of Yi Shiwen one by one. Raksha Star Punch. The moment these stars rushed in front of Yi Shiwen, they all turned into Raksha too, roaring as they charged over. Each of them rushed over with the force of a thunderbolt. Every Raksha could smash a mountain. It was conceivable how terrifying this fist silhouette that almost filled up the sky. This great sage late master's strength should not be easily dismissed. He was even more tyrannical than the previous blood hangman. However, Yi Shiwen was more than a little stronger than he was at the time. At that time he had just stepped into half-step great sage late, but now was close to entering great sage. It was incomparable. Humph! Yi Shiwen sneered. He released a terrifying aura from his body. The Rakshas that were charging over stopped in a peculiar manner not far in front of him, blocked by a strange aura. Immediately after Yi Shiwen spread out his big hands and formed a fiery red big hand, he reached through the whole sky to grab them. The Rakshas charging mightily through the sky were all wiped out in a flash, all turning into spiritual energy. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He stomped his foot suddenly and already moved in front of the great sage late. He clenched his fist. The endless starlights on his fist began to boil, and the mighty star power instantly shone through half the sky. The shattered star fist swept out in a flash, and the surroundings became a cosmic battlefield, cruel and cold. Golden light flickered like on his entire body, as if he was the only entity in the universe. His fist turned into a huge star on the spot and swooped down directly. Boom! Yi Shiwen's fist was swift. The opponent didn't avoid it at all, and was hit by a punch. Blood splattered out. The opponent's flesh almost crumbled in the sky, and all the bones in his body collapsed in an instant. How is this possible? How can you be so powerful? The man looked at Yi Shiwen, staggered. Just with a punch, he was almost killed by Yi Shiwen. Such a terrible fighting power was unimaginable. It was forgivable if they were the same rank, but Yi Shiwen was just a half-step great sage. He was badly wounded with one punch. It would only take 2 punches to finish him. However, Yi Shiwen didn't intend to answer him. He just stepped out and chased after him. Stop, let's slay this fiend together. The great sage peak master was shocked and angry. He did not expect Yi Shiwen to be so difficult. What was more embarrassing to him was that Yi Shiwen even killed one of his men with just one punch under his leadership. To him, it was a slap to his face, mocking him for being unable to contain his subordinate. The others nodded in agreement and hurriedly pursued him. Yi Zaiwen's extreme strength deterred them just now. They acknowledged that they themselves were about the same level as the great sage realm late master. If Yi Shiwen could beat him severely with one punch, then he could also beat them severely. Now they finally believed the earlier rumors that Yi Shiwen, who was a half-step great sage initial then, was able to kill a distinguished character of great sage initial. His combat power was too ferocious. If it was one-on-one, they might have to turn around and run away right now. They dared not fight back at all. Fortunately, there were several masters here, and one great sage realm peak master. In their view, no matter how strong Yi Shiwen was, there was no way he was as strong as a great sage realm peak. They were indeed right. Even if Yi Shiwen was stronger, it was impossible for him to cross that line. Even if he could blow up a great sage realm late master with one punch, he was not an opponent of a great sage realm peak. That was another realm. He had to wait until he entered great sage for that to be possible. However, he was faster. Before everyone caught up, he had already rushed up. He stomped his foot suddenly, breaking the sky beneath his foot. He instantly pounced onto the great sage realm late master who was flying through the sky. Boom. This time he couldn't fend off Yi Shiwen anymore. Yi Shiwen exerted great strength onto his foot and swooped down his kick. The opponent's body was torn apart in the air. Blood was splattered through the sky. He died tragically immediately, not even having the time to scream. You actually killed him. 2 great sages. You damn bastard. You killed 2 great sages of emergence school. Damn, this is unforgivable. I will massacre 10 of your kind. The great sage realm peak master roared furiously. They were delusional, thinking that the great sage intermediate master just now died because of carelessness. Yi Zaiwen's attack was too with no time to react. However, this great sage late master was slaughtered by Yi Shiwen in front of them. To him, it was a huge embarrassment. Massacring 9 of Yi Zaiwen's kind could not dispel his anger. Only the destruction of 10 of Yi Zaiwen's kind could please him a little. You want to massacre my kind? Don't you even think about leaving today? Yi Shiwen sneered, murderous intention flashing in his eyes. His feet did not stop. Instead, he unexpectedly charged toward the Tao soldiers. The few great sages chased behind him, and there were countless Tao soldiers attacking him from the front. There was a sneer at the corner of his mouth. He swallowed a pellet, and his aura began to rise violently. Boom. Suddenly, there was the sound of thunder, and endless clouds began to gather. Chapter 719. Activating the Great Sage Retribution. Loud and clear thunder rumbled through the heavens and the earth. Endless thunderclouds began to assemble and thunder dragons writhed among them. What is going on? Everyone stared at the endless clouds that began to assemble in the sky. They would not have bothered if it were just ordinary clouds. The least powerful among those present could easily dissipate large clouds. The real problem was that these were no ordinary clouds. They could feel heaven's might from that endless layer of cloud. No doubt about it. It was heaven's might. The heaven's might was magnificent, majestic, and went straight to the hearts. Regardless of what kind of species or what kind of strong people, all were the people of heaven. Under the mighty heaven's might, all of them were equal. Only the stronger warrior would fear a little less. Although the warriors claimed to be in defiance against the will of heaven and fought for their own destiny, few really dared to go against the will of heaven in reality. This was because those who dared to go against heaven were all split to death by heaven's retribution. The so-called chaos was merely turning and tossing within the framework created by heaven. No matter what the chaos was, it had its rationality. Nothing was possible without rationality. All warriors feared heaven, no matter who they were. It was the same for righteous or evil warriors. Shivering in fear under heaven's might was normal, although no one dared to ascertain the existence of heaven. However, now everyone could feel the strong heaven's might from within this endless cloud, which meant that this cloud was not formed naturally. Speaking of which, there was fierce wind whipping around in the midst of this intense battle. Under normal circumstances, how could there be clouds gathering? Even if it was originally covered with dark clouds, it would have been scattered. Heaven's retribution. Someone wants to challenge heaven's retribution. Everyone's face changed as they did not expect that someone was going to challenge heaven's retribution right here and right now. The most terrifying thing to everyone was the sight of the endless dark clouds. It signified the scale of this heaven's retribution was huge beyond borders. The greater the expanse, the more terrifying this heaven's retribution. They did not expect that someone's heaven's retribution could be so large. Isn't heaven's retribution only formed when someone attempts to enter the transcendence realm? Even when they were elevated to the great sage, there was no such grand scene. As a matter of fact, there was not even 1% of such a scene. Within the endless clouds were lightning sparkles and human silhouettes. This frightful scene signified its nature as a mutated heaven's retribution. No witnesses present anticipate an encounter with such heaven's retribution. They had only heard of this mutated heaven's retribution in legends and the classics. Even the distinguished characters could not even do that. Those who could cross into heaven's retribution were already legendary characters. Who the hell is challenging it? Everyone's eyes quickly fell on Yi Shiwen, because anomalies surged toward him continuously. His aura was constantly growing. There was a sign of him reaching the great sage realm in a single bound. In other words, his breakthrough was imminent. He was breaking through the great sage. As apparent as it seemed, Yi Shiwen was challenging heaven's retribution. Otherwise, there would not be such a terrible phenomenon. Suddenly, the face of the great sage peak master changed. He suddenly understood what Yi Shiwen was going to do. This was to destroy them all with the help of heaven's retribution. No wonder he dared to rush straight into the legion. At first, the crowd thought Yi Shiwen was crazy like a headless fly, and rushed into the Tao Soldier Legion. Come to think of it now, his intention was really vicious. He wanted to use heaven's retribution to bury them. What a vicious heart. The great sage peak master nearly broke his teeth as he gritted them tightly. If Yi Shiwen really lured heaven's retribution over, then their demise would be imminent. They would by default be the external force that helped Yi Shiwen to challenge heaven's retribution. Heaven's retribution would become more terrifying, and it was not impossible for the entire Tao Soldiers Legion to be completely wiped out. He finally understood what Yi Shiwen said just now, which was since they came, they would not be able to leave. Yi Shiwen had this in mind all along. Hurry! Retreat! That great sage peak master quickly shouted, but at this time, there was nowhere to go. Rather, it was already too late. Even if he shouted himself hoarse, his voice could not reach the ears of a legion of 10,000 soldiers. Even then many people still did not understand what was going on. This was not because they were stupid, but rather they were instantly dumbfounded by this abrupt incident. Thinking of leaving now? Too late. Yi Shiwen snorted. Just a moment ago, he started thinking of this idea. The 10,000 Tao Soldiers Legion were horrifying. He was just a half-step great sage. Even if a young powerhouse like Mu Xingjie would not dare to resist, Yi Shiwen did not want to spare them. So he could only use this method of borrowing the power of heaven's retribution to annihilate them all. Of course, the heaven's retribution had transformed to be more horrifying than it was originally. But Yi Shiwen did not care anymore. He wanted to utilize heaven's retribution to uplift his physical body and push his tyrant body scripture to the 8th level in one shot. By that time, his strength would experience a fundamental improvement. Thunder roars. As if to confirm Yi Shiwen's words, heaven was as though conveying its intention to kill. The neatly ordered heavenly lightning troops appeared in front of everyone. The weakest among the heavenly lightning troops was at least of Sage Realm level. All the heavenly lightning troops who concentrated together were enough to shake the world, sweeping away any other force. Moreover, there were also a lot of great Sage Realm masters within the group. This terrible army swept down from the sky. From a distance, it was a yellow torrent violently charging out from the majestic clouds. That Tao Soldiers Legion was a well-trained legion. They soon reacted, forming their phalanx. Boom! With a huge roar, the emergent school's army was instantly penetrated, and the entire phalanx was cut in half. There were shouts everywhere. The Tao soldiers and the heavenly lightning troops fought fiercely. At this time, no one was able to contend with Yi Shiwen at all. All their effort was concentrated on the heavenly lightning troops in front of them. You are so ruthless. The great sage peak master looked at Yi Shiwen, his body trembling with anger, and his face complexion turned ashen. He did not expect that it would end up like this. The confrontation just started. Thousands of Tao soldiers or the emergent school disciples were immediately killed on the spot. The loss was so great that even the great sage peak master felt distressed. If this continued on, the entire Tao soldiers' legion would be annihilated. No matter how ruthless I am, I cannot be compared to you. Yi Shiwen sneered from the side. Countless thunder dragons descended from the sky, striving to bombard him. His body emitted a green mist, rendering him invulnerable to the bombardment. The scene looked dreadful. The sky was full of lightning. Most of the heavenly lightning troops were stopped by the Tao soldiers' legion, or rather they had no other choice to fight these troops because these heavenly lightning troops had no real consciousness. They all rely on instinct. Since they appear under heaven's retribution, the legion presumed the troops were helping Yi Shiwen. Everyone in the legion had united against the troops, not for the reason to help Yi Shiwen, but to protect themselves. However, even so, a large number of thunder dragons fell straight from the clouds to Yi Shiwen's body. Yi Shiwen ran the tyrant golden body, and all of the lightning energy was absorbed by him. For every energy absorbed, for him, he could strengthen his tyrant golden body. Tyrant golden body had been stuck on the 7th level peak for a long time with no breakthrough. At this moment, he was going to leverage heaven's retribution to make his breakthrough. So even though he already knew that activating heaven's retribution at this very moment would render it more powerful due to the presence of these Tao soldiers' legion, he did not care. It was because a more powerful heaven's retribution was not a bad thing for him. Instead, he could use this heaven's retribution to hone his physical body, completely transforming himself, and let his physical body break through the 8th level in one fell swoop. With the 8th level acting as the fundamentals of his body, his strength would simply have another improvement. Even the masters of the transcendent realm could not kill him with one blow. This would become his life-saving opportunity in this turmoil. As long as he was not hunted by multiple transcendent realm masters, he had a chance to escape. This was very important. Although it was impossible to defeat the transcendent realm masters, it greatly improves the chance of surviving. You dare to absorb the power of heaven's retribution. The great sage peak master looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. Heaven's retribution power was both violent and just. It was one of the supreme forces between heaven and the earth. Ordinary people had to carefully make preparations to challenge heaven's retribution. It was impossible for them to be like Yi Shiwen, strolling idly without making any preparations in heaven's retribution challenge. The most important thing was that he dared to absorb such a violent power. This almost astounded him. Any normal person who dared to do the same would be instantly blown apart. How come he is okay? How strong is his physical body? Or is he a humanoid tyrannosaurus? Thinking of this, a murderous thought flashed through the eyes of this great sage peak master. Now that Yi Shiwen was already so horrifying, if he was allowed to successfully pass through heaven's retribution, then he would be beyond control. He had to take this opportunity to kill him before he successfully passed through heaven's retribution, and before he could transform into a great sage. Otherwise, it would inevitably become a big trouble. A metaphor for somebody who is rushing around frantically. Chapter 720, Tyrant Body Scriptures 8th Level Charge. Kill him. Otherwise, none of us will live today. Let's kill him, and heaven's retribution will stop. The great sage peak master shouted. It was undeniable this great sage peak master was still very clear-headed at this time. Although the Tao Legion was in danger of overturning now, this was all because of Yi Shiwen. Because this was the great sage tribulation he triggered. Once he died, then the entire heaven's retribution would disappear, and it would not continue to be launched at all. Therefore, everything could be avoided as long as Yi Shiwen was killed. No matter what, it could be said that they suffered great losses today. 2 great sages and thousands of soldiers were lost in an attempt to kill Yi Shiwen. It was a great loss. But there was no way out now. They could only force themselves to kill Yi Shiwen in order to survive. Otherwise, they would probably be overwhelmed by heaven's retribution and be completely exterminated at that time. Yi Shiwen didn't stop at all and rushed directly into the lightning sea. No, it was more like the lightning sea formed around his whole body. There were Tao soldiers who fought against those heavenly lightning troops and thunder dragons. But Yi Shiwen was the one who needed to cross the retribution after all, so most of the disasters were still flying towards him. At this time, it was no longer just storms that fell from the sky, but various types of weapons. Each of these weapons contained unimaginable mandates, and countless mandates condensed on the weapon. Every weapon which fell down could kill any true Wei legend. Even Sage Realm Masters might suffer severe injury if they were not careful. Yi Shiwen formed a giant hand which covered the sky and caught the countless weapons which filled the entire sky. He exploded them into a mass of energy directly, all of which were absorbed by Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen only felt that these violent energies which entered his body were domesticated into the usable energy by the tyrant body scripture. The energy fell into the mini-universe in his diaphragm. At this time, the mini-universe was also operating aggressively. It was originally about the size of a stellar system. Yi Shiwen refined it according to the pattern of the solar system based on his memory, but now the boundary was constantly expanding. It showed hints of transforming into a galaxy, which was the Milky Way. As Yi Shiwen was about to step into the Great Sage, this solar system was almost completing its transformation too. With the solar system as the center, it directly reorganized as the Milky Way. This was a crazy thing that Yi Shiwen could do. Other people simply would not dare to even think about it, because this was too dangerous. In case some accidents happened, the entire body would really collapse and it would be a really tragic death. However, once the Milky Way was formed successfully, then Yi Shiwen's strength would really have a huge leap. In addition to the tyrant body scripture that had a breakthrough to the 8th level, Yi Shiwen's strength could perhaps wipe out a great sage peak realm in an instant. Yi Shiwen charged into the clouds continuously, and the great sages behind him were pursuing closely. At this time, they must not let Yi Shiwen escape. If they couldn't kill Yi Shiwen as soon as possible, then the entire Tao Legion might be abolished and collapsed in a flash. Perhaps the whole army would be exterminated. This was what they couldn't afford in any case. This damn heaven's retribution will only end by killing Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen also knew their exact plan. He naturally knew what they were thinking, so he could not be caught by them. As long as he dragged on for a while, the fearful legion would be completely exterminated. Innumerable lightning weapons were thrusted downwards, but even if each weapon hit Yi Shiwen's body, it would only create metallic clashing sounds on his body. Then there was a burst of green smoke. There was no way of inflicting further harm to Yi Shiwen at all. Yi Shiwen's tyrant body scripture had not progressed to the 8th level yet. But even if it was only the 7th level of tyrant body scripture, it also reflected the incomparable solidity of his body. But the great sages behind him were not so lucky. Their bodies couldn't be compared with Yi Shiwen, even though their bodies had already been perfected upon entering the great sage. But perfection did not mean that it was very powerful. The strength of the physical body was divided into two aspects. One was the innate bloodline. Some with special physiques would have terrifying physical bodies like Titan body. Another was being invincible by martial techniques. For instance, Yi Shiwen's tyrant body scripture was one of the best. The tyrant body which he cultivated according to the tyrant body scripture could even beat the Titan body. It already amazed countless people at that time. But they were obviously none of the mentioned. Although they were great sages, they were obviously not comparable to Yi Shiwen. At this time, they looked rather miserable. Although each of these lightning weapons was not particularly powerful, it was really horrifying when so many of them fell down like raindrops. They had to utilize their great sage weapons to block on top of their heads at this time. The weapons were not weak intrinsically as all attacks were resolved. Their great sage weapons were also very tyrannical. Although they seemed quite miserable, they were not in danger. The more miserable they were, the more they hated Yi Shiwen now. If it was not for him, they wouldn't be so miserable. Of course, it would not cross their minds that they would not encounter such a thing if they did not come and attack True Martial School. The more Yi Shiwen flew upwards, the more horrifying the encounter was. The lightning was no longer in weapon form, but it transformed into vicious beasts. Roar! A real lightning dragon roared and slashed towards Yi Shiwen. It actually had great sage-level strength. Furthermore, it was composed of energy, so it would be very difficult to kill it. Typical great sages who encountered it would be doomed. The huge dragon claw formed traces of martial arts. That was the dragon claw. The most original and authentic dragon claw. The dragon claw simulated by human hands could not be compared with the real dragon claw at all. Yi Shiwen did not show any weakness and shot a coiled dragon palm directly. His hands turned into two huge dragon claws, seizing the golden light directly. Bang! A mega explosion sound echoed out. The golden lightning dragon screamed desperately as his dragon claws were torn by Yi Shiwen directly in the air. Although Dragon Clan's body was terrifying, it was not really a dragon clan after all. It was only composed of energy. Moreover, Yi Ziwen's body was more powerful. That mighty body was born to challenge the legendary demon god. Yi Shiwen even dared to challenge the real Dragon Clan, not to mention an energy composition. Therefore, Yi Shiwen didn't stop after he tore the dragon claw directly. He stepped in front of the golden lightning dragon in an instant, waving his two huge dragon claws, and slashing towards the lightning dragon. Slash! This lightning dragon was simply torn into halves by Yi Shiwen on the spot. It transformed into a mass of lightning energy, which was absorbed by Yi Shiwen. This lightning dragon's energy was not comparable to those of the previous lightning weapons at all, because there was a qualitative difference. This was the energy that had truly reached the great sage level. It was completely absorbed by him now. The benefits it brought to his tyrant body scripture were simply beyond description. Yi Shiwen had a content feeling in his heart now. The anger and depression in his heart just now were forgotten all at once. His tyrant body scripture was about to have a breakthrough, and his cultivation was about to break through into the great sage realm. At the same time, he could also destroy the emergence school's Tao Legion. There was nothing else which was better for him. He wanted to further break in and rush in. Then he could behead all these lightning-transformed vicious beasts and absorb all of them. He had a hunch that his 7th-level tyrant body was really close to a breakthrough. He looked around, and everywhere he saw was filled with various lightning-transformed vicious beasts. Moreover, many of them were legendary creatures like the Azure Dragon, Red Vermilion, by Fong 1, and many other vicious beasts were wandering in the clouds. These were originally the Heaven's Retribution which would charge downwards in the next stage. All of them were vicious beasts of the Great Sage level. All of them had appeared in advance because Yi Shiwen rushed up now. If they killed Yi Shiwen in advance, this Heaven's Retribution would also end. The great sages behind Yi Shiwen were a little stunned while looking at the legendary beasts in front of their eyes. Even if they knew that it was composed of lightning and not the actual beast, they still felt dizzy when they saw so many legendary divine beasts and vicious beasts. Have we come to the primitive era? They could actually see so many vicious beasts and divine beasts in every direction. Each of these beasts were monstrous. The great sages claimed that they could deal with any of these beasts, but once more than one vicious beasts and divine beasts surround them, it would be a dead end for them. Scanning the surrounding, there were actually hundreds of such vicious beasts and divine beasts. Once they go up, they might be torn in half instantly. While they were hesitating, Yi Shiwen had rushed towards the vicious beasts and divine beasts. The sounds of beasts roaring echoed all over their ears. Such a scene was really scary. In the face of hundreds of great sage-level vicious beasts and divine beasts, even the Yi Shiwen who was still killing everywhere previously was injured. He was soon cut by the sharp claws and there were bloodstains all over his body. Some wounds were so deep that his bones were visible, while some nearly tore him off. But he kept battling tenaciously, constantly utilizing his Phoenix regeneration technique to heal his body wounds. Boom! Yi Shiwen blasted a vicious beast and absorbed its energy on the spot. Boom! Boom! One after another legendary vicious beasts and divine beasts were gradually bombarded by Yi Shiwen high up in the sky. The beasts converted into energy which was then absorbed by Yi Shiwen. His momentum was also constantly escalating. Every time he killed a vicious beast or a divine beast, his strength became stronger. Hence, his speed of killing those vicious beasts or divine beasts also accelerated. After what seemed like centuries, Yi Shiwen finally killed all the vicious beasts and divine beasts. The energy of utmost strength and utmost yang poured into his body, making his body seem to explode. The existing barriers of tyrant body scripture were also blasted away in a flash. He finally reached the 8th level of tyrant body scripture. 1 https://yen. Wikipedia. org/wiki/by_fang_bird. Chapter 721. Successive Massacre. The tyrant body scripture's 8th level that was stuck for decades was finally reached. Golden light radiated off his body. If one looked closely, one would see a golden stream flowing on his body like water. As his tyrant body scripture achieved breakthroughs continuously, the combination of divinity on his body and himself became deeper. The original divinity was not cultivated by Yi Shiwen himself. According to the legends, deities and Buddhas had their own golden bodies, which were tempered by their own divinity and cast into a supreme golden body. The golden body was indestructible, eternal, and untarnishable. The method that Yi Mo taught Yi Shiwen was actually the method these legendary figures used to form the golden body. It was combined with the tyrant body that Yi Shiwen cultivated at that time. Thus, Yi Ziwen's body appeared scarier and scarier. The more he cultivated, the scarier his body became. If it was just the tyrant body, although already tyrannical, it would not be as scary. Now that it was combined with the golden body that only deities could nurture, his own body that already had the tyrannical tyrant body made another huge leap. However, Yi Shiwen was not a deity. He himself did not have the so-called divinity, so these divinities were not his own, but were originally extracted from the descendants of those beast god on Thousands Demon Beasts Island. Not only did the divinity not belong to him, it belonged to the deities of the demon clan, and were even more incompatible with Yi Shiwen. If it weren't for the tyrant body scripture's impressive effect of absorbing all the energy in the world, he would not have been able to form the golden body. Although he had now formed a golden body, only he knew that there was a huge gap between these divinities and himself, and that there was no way they could truly integrate. However, as his tyrant body scripture's level became higher, the integration of divinity became more successful. His tyrant golden body became more overbearing. Initially, these divinities belonged to the beast god. Their brands were in the divinity. They could even be turned into countless lesser beast gods, but they were now getting smoothed out little by Yi Ziwen's tyrant body scripture. What used to be an unstable factor was now nothing. Ha 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 ha. Yi Shiwen was feeling carefree. This battle was delightful. The wounds on his body that were deep to the bone were being restored bit by the phoenix regeneration technique. At this time, the great sages below had caught up. Those terrifying, ferocious beasts were eliminated by Yi Shiwen one by one. Naturally, they dared to come up. They couldn't let Yi Shiwen continue to achieve breakthroughs without restraint. Otherwise, they might really die here. As the battle continued to develop, more and more heavenly lightning troops joined the battle, disrupting the Tao soldiers' phalanx. At this point, the Tao soldiers had lost tens of thousands of people. This was an unprecedented loss. They had never encountered such a terrifying opponent. Compared with the heavenly lightning troops who had no main consciousness and were unconcerned about life or death, these Tao soldiers' boasts of not fearing death seemed very laughable now. One side was not afraid of life and death, and the other side was unconcerned about life and death. The winner was obvious. Moreover, these heavenly lightning troops only had pure martial art consciousness. Although they did not have main consciousness, they had mastered martial arts to an unimaginable level. The Tao soldiers fought bleakly. If the fight continued this way, it would not last long. The entire Tao soldier legion would be annihilated. However, if they were asked to charge toward the heavenly lightning troops, they would not even have the guts. They were definitely about to be torn apart soon. At this time, there was only one way, that was to kill Yi Shiwen in order to restore the decline. Seeing these great sages rushing up, Yi Shiwen was not afraid at all. He just laughed aloud. Good job on coming here. The 8th level of his tyrant body scripture was complete. Just as he was looking for someone to practice it, these people arrived. He moved suddenly. A layer of golden divinity waves appeared beneath his feet. As if his body was a bolt of golden light, he tore through the sky and rushed directly toward those great sages. This punk actually dares to rush over. You're really courting death. The great sage Realm Peak Master sneered, not taking Yi Shiwen seriously. He could already tell since before that although Yi Shiwen regarded the great sage late sages as though they were nothing, Yi Shiwen was definitely not his opponent. Otherwise, would he still have to run away? Yi Shiwen could have directly killed someone on his level. Although Yi Zaiwen's counterattack at this time surprised him, he still saw Yi Zaiwen's cultivation as half-step great sage late, so he was not worried. He did not care about Yi Zaiwen's counterattack. He immediately blasted toward Yi Shiwen. Holy music played and golden lotuses appeared on the ground. Countless holy realm dwellers were chanting ancient scriptures, and the holy domain land of happiness that everyone yearned for erupted. This was a holy domain. He was practicing the supreme lost technique of Emergence School, the Emergence Godly Fist. In his hands, the Emergence Godly Fist had reached the point of perfection. Compared with Lao Yi, it became many times more overbearing and was totally incomparable. He immediately fell directly on Yi Zaiwen's body to crush Yi Shiwen to death with the supreme holy domain. Yi Shiwen was not afraid at all. He took the initiative, clenched his fists, and turned it into a blazing star, delivering a heavy bombardment. Boom! The star fell into the holy domain instantly, causing the world to change color. In the holy domain, the ground trembled and the mountains shook. Countless holy realm dwellers in the turmoil vanished from the face of the earth. The so-called Pure Land, the so-called holy domain, was instantly penetrated by Yi Zaiwen's punch. An apocalyptic scene emerged. This was not the first time he fought against the Emergence Godly Fist, but none of those times were as swift as this time. With no care in the world, Yi Shiwen crushed him with his tyrannical body. His fists were invincible. All attacks were useless. After his fist blasted through the entire holy domain, it landed hard on the fist of that great sage Realm Peak veteran. Boom! A loud noise sounded as if a huge stone had smashed into the calm lake water. Unimaginable, spherical lights burst out in all directions. The terrifying undulation instantly flattened a large part of the surrounding space. A huge mushroom cloud rose into the sky. Strong winds swept out in all directions, rushing out in circles. The scene where Yi Shiwen was immediately blasted to pieces that the great sage Realm Peak Master anticipated never happened. On the contrary, both of them were actually even. Neither wanted to give in. The whole clash seemed long, but in fact, it happened in just an instant. The two began to fight with all their strength, unwilling to compromise. The great sage Realm Peak Master was very depressed. He actually ended up evenly tied with Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen was very satisfied. He just achieved a breakthrough at the 8th level of the Tyrant Body Scripture, and could contend against the great sage Realm Peak Master. Once he fully adapted to the 8th level Tyrant Body, his strength would continue to rise. If he could also achieve a breakthrough at the realm, and enter the Great Sage, destroying the Great Sage Realm Peak would not be a problem by that time. His powers were increasing greatly. How could he not be happy? For the other few Great Sage Realm late masters who had just arrived, a terrified look only appeared on their faces at this time. Initially, they relied on the fact that Yi Shiwen could not contend with Great Sage Realm Peak Master. All they had to do was help out on the side. Who knew that Yi Shiwen could now contend against a Great Sage Realm Peak Master without losing ground? This was different from what they originally thought. They haven't come to their senses yet, but Yi Zaiwen's offense had already arrived. The surroundings seemed to have become a universe. The vast sea of stars was Yi Zaiwen's attack. He was like the only true god in the universe. The vast universe was controlled by him. Mightily, all the stars in the universe swooshed down. Ah! A great sage realm late master screamed in agony. He was directly bombarded by Yi Zaiwen's punch, turning into a mist of blood on the spot. Previously, Yi Shiwen could only deal a heavy but not fatal blow to a great sage realm late master, but now he could kill one with a punch. Although he did not seem to appear any different, In fact, there was a world of difference. His improvement in strength was obvious. Stop! The great sage realm peak master was shocked and furious. He charged over directly, dropping an emergence godly fist. Another holy domain fell down, puncturing the heavens, and was about to fall to Yi Shiwen body. Golden light flashed on Yi Zaiwen's body. He directly avoided the holy domain that was crashing down. His body was like a dragon as he charged toward another great sage realm late master. Boom! Another punch directly smashed the great sage realm late master's body. The terrifying power instantly destroyed his spirit. Yi Shiwen showed no mercy. There was no room for easing up at all. He had already made up his mind. Since these people are already here, then there's no way of letting you leave. Yi Zaiwen's speed was extremely fast. With his tyrant body stepping into the 8th level in one fell swoop, his speed also achieved a fundamental breakthrough. When a person's speed exceeded the limit, how fast they could go was basically dependent on the person's body. Breaking through the sound barrier and the space barrier would cause a strong reactive force. Without a tyrannical body, he was afraid he would be torn apart directly. As Yi Zaiwen's body went up a level, his speed naturally became faster than before. Although demon wings didn't unfold, utilizing bodily techniques still made his speed extremely fast. The great sage realm master simply couldn't catch up. Although Yi Shiwen couldn't do anything about him, the two could only be regarded as equals. However, his speed was far inferior to that of Yi Shiwen. He could only watch helplessly as several of his great sages were slaughtered by Yi Shiwen. Boom! Boom! Two loud sounds like thunder resounded through the sky. The two remaining great sage late masters were directly blasted by Yi Shiwen. Chapter 722. The escalation of the heavens retribution in front of Yi Shiwen, who just had a breakthrough. These masters were like babies, and they could not cause any harm to Yi Shiwen. The great sage peak could only stare helplessly at Yi Shiwen massacring. Yi Shiwen just broke through the 8th level of the tyrant body scripture. It was like a metamorphosis. The great sage peak master was terrified. If Yi Shiwen attains the great sage realm, who could control this young monster? The disciples of the true martial school who were watching the battle from afar, stupidly stared at the godlike Yi Shiwen who was in the sky. Yi Shiwen stepped onto the void with golden divinity waves under his feet. He was engulfed with golden divine light all over, just like an omnipotent god made of gold. The omnipresent thunder only added a little power to him. It was unable to hurt Yi Shiwen, who was already at the 8th level of the tyrant body. While everyone was shocked by the heavenly appearance of Yi Shiwen, they also had mixed feelings in their hearts. At first, they had only heard of Yi Zaiwen's terrifying success in battle, but now they could witness it in person. They did not know what was recorded in the legend, but they could see with their own eyes how Yi Shiwen slaughtered the great sages like killing chicken or dogs, almost scaring them to death. He is too strong. Although he had not shown his legendary horrifying cultivation that could defeat Mu Shengjia of the great sage great perfection, he was already a godlike man for them. Like Mount Tai and Mount Everest, did it make sense for humans to debate which was higher? In front of these mountains, humans were too insignificant. When he was only at the 7th level of the tyrant body, he still needed to be careful to deal with these heavens' retribution. However, now that he had entered the 8th level, he did not need to bother at all. Those thunder retribution that besieged him were completely absorbed by his tyrant body scripture, tempering his body and making him more powerful. Yi Shiwen just sneered and did not continue to entangle with the great sage peak master. Now that most of the great sage on the emergence school side had been beheaded by him, he still could not deal with this person yet. He would need to wait for the calamity to subside first, then come and deal with him. After he had broken through to the great sage realm, it would be easy to slaughter him. Boom! In the sky, Yi Zaiwen's figure was like a dragon. He rushed straight into where the Tao Legion and the heavenly lightning troops were locked in a desperate battle, and started a killing spree. To him, whether it was the Tao Legion or the heavenly lightning troops, they were all enemies. There was no difference at all, and all needed to be slaughtered. Yi Shiwen stomped dozens of the heavenly lightning troops in the battle, who turned into pure lightning energy, and was absorbed by Yi Zaiwen's tyrant body. He could feel his tyrant body became more tyrannic. These heavenly lightning troops were all made up of the purest lightning power in heaven's retribution. It was one of the purest energies in the sky and earth, in which Yi Shiwen could directly absorb these energies without having to filter any impurities. Hence, this was why he liked to kill these heavenly lightning troops. Yi Ziwen's terrible shockwave straightaway blasted out dozens of Tao Legion nearby, who shrieked and were killed by the shock. Their strength was far too inferior compared to Yi Shiwen. Whether they were at the legend or sage realm, they were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. At this time, the battle had entered the most intense stage. These Tao Legion rather fight to the death than to retreat, which thoroughly irritated heaven's retribution. An endless amount of heavenly lightning troops were constantly being produced in the air to join the battle. This would continue until all the Tao Legion were completely destroyed. Now the majestic Tao Legion, who originally numbered 10,000 people, were dead or wounded. Only about 10,000 people were left. The casualties exceeded 2/3. It was not that they did not want to escape, now they could not escape at all. The heavenly lightning troops surrounded them tightly in the periphery. This was the case with the so-called catch a turtle in the urn, 1. And most importantly, Yi Shiwen was the protagonist of heaven's retribution. Wherever he was, heaven's retribution would naturally be there. He followed this Tao Legion closely. The heaven's retribution would also follow this Tao Legion closely. They must be completely annihilated before he would be satisfied. Behind Yi Shiwen, the great sage Peak Master kept chasing Yi Shiwen, but his speed was far behind Yi Ziwen's speed. He could only watch Yi Shiwen keep flashing in and out, initiating a killing spree, and then absorbed a great amount of energy from the heavenly lightning troops, which made Yi Shiwen become more and more powerful. The Tao Legion was being struck, and their assets were plundered by Yi Shiwen. Although these Tao Legion were essentially treated as consumables, their status could not be compared as the official status. Their potential had long been cleanly overdrawn. The wealth on them was not comparable to the official disciples. However, the amount was still unbearably huge. In just this short period of time, the wealth that Yi Shiwen robbed was more than 100 million elixirs. Although it was nothing compared to Yi Ziwen's huge wealth, it was better than nothing. On the contrary, he had plundered 500 million elixirs from the great sage, who he just beheaded quite some time ago. Yi Shiwen ignored the roar of the great sage Peak Master behind him. He focused on continuously slashing the Tao Legion and the heavenly lightning troops. There was no one who could stop him from going forward. The person who could destroy a legion alone was Yi Shiwen. It was conceivable if he was in the transcendent realm. He was barely a great sage. No, he had not stepped into the great sage yet. However, as heaven's retribution escalated, again and again, Yi Shiwen slowly found out that the heavenly lightning troops of the legend realm were nowhere to be found. The most he saw were the sage realm level masters. There were even a lot of heavenly lightning troops of the great sage level. This was the escalation of heaven's retribution again. Even Yi Shiwen had to deal with it carefully. Although none of them could cause a fatal threat to him, there were too many of them. A large number of heavenly lightning troops together could cause a fatal threat to him. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, even heaven wants to destroy you. Don't you want to make use of heaven's retribution to destroy our Tao soldiers? Now you really shot yourself in the foot. If you look for a disaster, there is no escape. The great sage Peak Master saw what was happening and laughed out loud. His ashen face was full of joy and at this time, looked a bit malevolent. Yi Ziwen's original plan was to make use of heaven's retribution to eliminate the Tao soldiers, but now with the further escalation of heaven's retribution, the heavenly lightning troops were becoming more and more powerful. Yi Shiwen would soon be drowned by the heavenly lightning troops of the great sage realm. In his view, this was the so-called retribution. Yi Ziwen's retribution was really heaven-sent. He did not chase. On one hand, he could not keep up. On the other hand, he wanted to watch Yi Shiwen being killed by heaven's retribution, which would be really a huge relief. Of course, the most important thing was that there were a lot of great sage realm heavenly lightning troops around him. Heaven's retribution also regarded Yi Shiwen as another target to be eliminated. Yi Shiwen sneered, looked at the master of the great sage Peak Master, and said, "Do you think these heaven's retribution can do anything to me? Really ridiculous." Although he and this great sage peak master's master strength were almost on par, he had broken through the 8th level of the tyrant body, increasing his chance of survival. He had complete victory over this great sage peak master's master. The two sides were not at the same level. Yi Shiwen rushed straight into a team of heavenly lightning troops composed entirely of great sages. Various anomalies appeared all over the body. Various martial arts were deployed in his hands. They were all cast on those heavenly lightning troops without any hindrance or stagnation. The war had just begun, and was not the end of it. Even if the Tao Legion were slaughtered, the real test for Yi Shiwen had just begun. The escalated heaven's retribution was more powerful than he thought. There were a large number of great sage-level heavenly lightning troops attacking, and most importantly, these heavenly lightning troops had formed a phalanx that was very difficult to deal with. However, at this time he had no choice. If he were to make a choice at that time, he would still choose to activate the Great Sage Tribulation. Although it would lead to the escalation of heaven's retribution, it was better than being killed by all the Tao Legion. For the size of the Tao Legion at that time, even a strong man like Mu Xingjia could only flee in desertion. He had no choice. In the face of such a huge force, the strength of one person was too small. Even he could not really compete against the whole legion. He had no choice, but now he had to pay for the choices he made. In the distant empty sky, without anyone noticing, a figure was slowly twisted from the void, appearing on the horizon of the sky. The battle happening in the sky, even the mighty heaven's might could not affect him. A black cloak covered the whole body. No one knew his appearance, but he looked at Yi Shiwen, who was in battle, coldly, revealing a pair of blood-red eyes. After letting out an inaudible cold sneer, this figure slowly disappeared into space. When it reappeared, it was already in the underground sealed area of the Star Beast. However, now Yi Shiwen, who was up in the sky, did not know about this. He had already fought to his heart's content. After breaking through to the 8th level of the tyrant body, his body suddenly leaped up one level. Even as he faced the ambush of the Great Sage Realm, there was no fatal threat, although there were some difficulties. On the contrary, he could use these empty spaces to continue blasting the heavenly lightning troops. One catching a turtle in the urn, to set up an easy target for oneself. Chapter 723. Finally entered Great Sage. As Yi Shiwen continued to blast the Great Sage heavenly lightning troops, he swallowed loads of Great Sage level energy into his body. A part of it was used to continue to refine the body and strengthen the 8th level Tyrant Bodhi's foundation. The other part gushed into the mini-universe in his diaphragm to expand his mini-universe. This allowed his observing person scripture to continue progressing towards the Great Sage Realm breakthrough. As more and more Great Sage Realm heavenly lightning troops were bombarded, his strength was getting stronger and stronger. He was getting closer to the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen seemed to have entered an extremely profound and mysterious realm indistinctly. His body just instinctively repeated the routine of blast, absorb, and get stronger. Then he would reblast, reabsorb, and become even stronger. He was quite similar to the heavenly lightning troops. He seemed to have lost his main consciousness in an instant, and was fighting only with his martial art consciousness. He was becoming stronger gradually. His efficiency of butchering heavenly lightning troops was increasing. It would take a while before he could blast a heavenly lightning troops initially, and he could blast one soldier on almost every encounter now. His strength was surging rapidly with each attack. He reached the peak eventually. There was only a narrow margin before he could have a breakthrough into the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen seemed to have shielded all the interferences, and started a martial art training in his own world. The most important thing of a breakthrough from the Sage Realm to Great Sage Realm was the spirit transformation. This was something he had already done, but he must have powerful Great Sage Realm laws in order to truly be in the Great Sage Realm. Yi Shiwen was condensing the Great Sage Realm laws now. He gathered one after another Sage Realm laws, and transformed them into the Great Sage Realm laws. When he had completed all of these, he would enter the Great Sage Realm officially. He had completed spirit transformation, which was the most difficult thing for other people. When his laws were transformed completely, he would become a great sage directly. Since he was in the midst of transforming now, he must calm his heart to feel the existence of the heaven way. The great sage realm laws were far more profound than the sage realm laws. It was getting more and more difficult. Every time he completed the transformation of a law on his body, his strength was more powerful. A total of 9,900 sage realm laws on his body were constantly changing and appearing one after another above his head. At the same time, the laws in the sky were also absorbed and condensed. He became even more powerful. 1 law, 2 laws, 3 laws, 10 laws, 100 laws, 200 laws, 300 laws, 1,000 laws. His laws were being transformed little by little, and his body exuded the majesty of a great sage gradually. This was a kind of majesty after the spirit-level transformation, which only great sages could exhibit. No, we can't let him continue transforming. The great sage peak realm master barely blasted the great sage realm heavenly lightning troops who were besieging them, and saw the surprising scene coincidentally. Yi Shiwen had begun to condense the great sage laws after just a brief moment. If this continued, Yi Shiwen would achieve great sage very soon. Although he did not know why Yi Shiwen did not go through the most painful spirit transformation process, he knew that he could not allow Yi Shiwen to continue like this. Otherwise, he would be doomed for sure. He was about to go insane at this time because there were only more than 1,000 people in the Tao Legion who were still fighting tenaciously. The rest were killed by the heavenly lightning troops. It was almost equal to the extermination of the whole army. At this time, he no longer carried the hope of saving this army. His only hope was to kill Yi Shiwen in order to seek revenge on behalf of them. But this hope became smaller gradually as Yi Shiwen became more tyranny. Right now was his only chance. He had to disrupt Yi Ziwen's enlightenment now while Yi Shiwen was in the process of enlightenment. This was the only way to stop Yi Ziwen's enlightenment process and prevent Yi Shiwen from becoming a great sage. Only then he still had a chance of survival. Otherwise, the development of the situation would be fixed. The great sage peak realm master pounced towards Yi Shiwen suddenly. He risked everything in one blow in an attempt to kill Yi Shiwen immediately. He launched one holy domain downward directly, so that he could press Yi Shiwen to death. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes suddenly. A beam of light flashed in his eyes, and gave Yi Shiwen an indifferent look like how spiritual beings looked at mortal beings. It was indifferent and emotionless. It was actually his martial art consciousness dominating his body. Without the main consciousness, he looked cold and ruthless. He was not affected by anything at all. He drew a punch directly which was like a brilliant star core. Countless burning giant stars suddenly broke into the holy domain. Kaboom! In the midst of the huge sonic boom, the holy domain was exploded by the countless stars to the point of collapse, just like Armageddon depicted in the legends. Poof! The great sage peak realm master spurted blood, and he flew away like an unfettered kite. He was directly blasted away even before the previous scene of even battle appeared. The great sage peak realm master widened his eyes and couldn't believe it. Yi Shiwen couldn't compare with him at all at the beginning. Yi Shiwen kept escaping as he attacked. Then Yi Shiwen was evenly matched with him, and he was hurt by Yi Ziwen's powerful punch now. It had not been a long time, but Yi Ziwen's cultivation had improved tremendously. He simply couldn't believe it. How did this happen? He is just crossing the great sage retribution. Why is there such a terrifying transformation? Plus, this happened before he passed the great sage retribution. He was very clear that this was not Yi Ziwen's limit. If Yi Shiwen survived the great sage retribution and transformed into a great sage successfully, then Yi Shiwen would not only have the ability to hurt him with one punch. It should be said that one punch could knock him out, and he would not have the power to fight back at all. He was in disbelief. He had seen someone had a breakthrough while battling before, but he never saw someone who got to such a terrifying extent after a breakthrough while battling. This person, who was not an opponent at all originally, could injure his rival with a punch now. How could there be such a horrifying improvement? Is he a freak? But the body dominated by Yi Ziwen's martial art consciousness didn't intend to continue to kill him. It just continued to manifest various martial arts miraculous phenomena, and continued to fight with the heavenly lightning troops. It was as if nothing happened just now. The most important thing for Yi Shiwen was to have a breakthrough to become a great sage. Once he had a breakthrough to become a great sage, then he could kill the great sage peak realm master with a breeze. 4,000 laws. 5,000 laws. 6,000 laws. Yi Shiwen was still getting stronger. As he continued to get stronger, Heaven's retribution seemed to know that Yi Shiwen was about to have a breakthrough. There were more heavenly lightning troops besieging Yi Shiwen to prevent Yi Shiwen from having a breakthrough. With only scattered resistance of the army left, the pressure from heavenly lightning troops fully extended on Yi Shiwen. Even with the strength of Yi Ziwen's body at this time, he was still bombarded repeatedly with cracking skin revealing flesh, blood splattering, and bones snapping. It was very gruesome. However, he stood up again and again. He was only left with martial art consciousness. The main consciousness was realizing the heaven way and could not be extracted at all. However, he was also accustomed to such multitasking. Even his star beast avatar was still constantly realizing and breaking through in order to have a breakthrough to the half-step transcendent realm. There was not much difference for him. But every time he fell down and stood up again, his strength increased a little. The laws were condensed almost every minute and second. After some time, the frequency of Yi Shiwen being bombarded was getting less, and he was getting stronger. His Bodis aura fluctuated wildly and surged straight towards the skyline all of a sudden. It was like a shocking air column which soared to the sky. The aura in him seemed to have completed a huge transformation with a qualitative change. His originally scattered Great Sage Realm laws were completely condensed together as a whole now. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fist was impactful, directly bombarding several heavenly lightning troops of the Great Sage Realm. The lightning energy poured into Yi Ziwen's body like a torrent. This breakthrough seemed like the last straw that broke a camel's back. 1. Boom. His aura had a breakthrough and surpassed the peak. That was the horrifying aura of a great sage realm, overwhelming the whole world. It's over, it's over. Looking at Yi Ziwen's continuous breakthrough, the great sage peak realm master could not help but be ashen-faced. He didn't expect that it would end like this in the end. He thought it was a very simple thing in the beginning. He only had to wipe out a fortified point of the true martial school. But he didn't expect that not only was the whole army exterminated, he even had to die as well in the end. It was not that he was so noble that he didn't run away, but that he couldn't escape at all. He was slowed down by the heavenly lightning troops, so he couldn't run away. He had no choice but to watch as Yi Shiwen had a breakthrough to Great Sage Realm. He also had a breakthrough once, so he naturally knew what Yi Shiwen was doing now. Yi Shiwen was already so scary previously, not to mention now. Yi Shiwen opened his eyes, and his aura swept out in circular forms like waves. He finally had a breakthrough into the Great Sage Realm. 1. An idiom describes the seemingly minor action that causes an unpredictably large and sudden reaction, because of the cumulative effect of small actions previously. Chapter 724. Entering the peak breaking into the Great Sage Realm was a profound process for him. When all 9,999 Sage Realm laws were transformed into Great Sage Realm laws, and condensed into the 10,000th Great Sage Realm law, he naturally crossed into the Great Sage Realm. For others, it might take more close cultivation time before they could cross. After all, they still needed to complete the spirit transformation. But for Yi Shiwen, this step was largely omitted. The transformation into the Great Sage Realm was completed naturally. Truly stepping into the Great Sage Realm, Yi Shiwen suddenly felt an intense difference from the half-step Great Sage Realm. He simply felt as if the world had become much clearer. It was different from when he first entered the Sage Realm. When he first entered the Sage Realm, he only felt that his body had become a mini-universe that became more and more perfect. It was mainly perfection of the body, but now this was a true transformation of the spirit. Generally speaking, the stronger the spirit, the easier it was to perceive the heaven way. When he entered the Great Sage, the difficulty of perceiving the existence of the heaven way reduced a lot. Or in other words, he could perceive more heaven way at once. It felt like the shackles that imprisoned him in the past had been broken at once. All of a sudden, He felt that he could see the world for what it was. The most important thing was that the improvement in strength was by leaps and bounds. Compared with the previous half-step great sage, it was not on the same level. At this time he finally understood why the great sage was said to be the real tyranny, and also the second huge hurdle on the road of martial arts. Once you cross it, there would be a tremendous change. Yi Shiwen clenched his fist. It was another Shattered Star Fist. Compared with just now, the power of Shattered Star Fist now was increased by a whole level. Wherever the punch reached, countless heavenly lightning troops barely had time to let out a groan before they were crushed to pieces. How could this be? The gods are so unfair. The Great Sage Realm Peak Master wailed. This monster was actually allowed to achieve a breakthrough into the Great Sage Realm. A Tao Legion was wiped in his hands. What a brutal person he was. However, suddenly, he quickly noticed that the Great Safe Realm heavenly lightning troops that surrounded him before had now retreated one by one, disappearing between the clouds in the sky. He suddenly understood that this was because their existence was dependent on Yi Ziwen's Great Sage retribution. Now that Yi Shiwen had successfully entered the Great Sage Realm, the Great Sage retribution was naturally about to end, and these heavenly lightning troops were about to retreat. However, to his surprise, Yi Shiwen actually made a shocking move. He actually chased Heaven's retribution directly into the clouds. Although Heaven's retribution was almost finished, he was still dissatisfied and wanted to chase it into the clouds, not letting it go. Not only was he dumbfounded, many of the true martial school disciples below were also dumbfounded. They finally saw the Heaven's retribution retreat. The mighty heavens might also disappearing soon. But they soon saw a scene that was even more astonishing. Yi Shiwen actually dared to chase Heaven's retribution. What was Heaven's retribution? It was a test and a calamity given by the gods, representing the majesty of the gods. As creatures beneath the gods, all were extremely afraid of them. Even the most ferocious, evil person was no exception. Now that the Heaven's retribution had retreated, Yi Shiwen should have been relieved, but now he actually dared to chase the Heaven's retribution. They were all dumbfounded. Yi Shiwen directly chased Heaven's retribution into the clouds. If this was before his breakthrough, he would not have dared to do so, but now his strength had increased greatly, so he got the courage to do so. Boom, boom, boom. There were a series of explosions. With every explosion, a large group of heavenly lightning troops were smashed into pure energy by Yi Shiwen, and then absorbed by him. The Heaven's retribution seemed to be angered by Yi Ziwen's lack of scruples. Suddenly, a large number of heavenly lightning troops turned around and charged toward Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen wasn't surprised and instead found it amusing. He immediately burst out laughing. He rushed forward toward the heavenly lightning troops. The heavenly lightning troops were blasted by him one by one, unable to cause any problems for Yi Shiwen, whose skills had improved by leaps and bounds into the Great Sage Realm. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen was still borrowing the energy contained in these heavenly lightning troops' bodies to cultivate. After entering the Great Sage Realm, there was no longer a realm barrier. The initial thick realm barrier did not exist anymore. As long as there was enough energy accumulated, he could even hit the peak of the Great Sage Realm initial straightaway. Initially, it required polishing. It should be polished little by little, and it took time to polish. After reaching the Great Sage Realm, every realm was important. This was laying the foundation. In fact, according to Yemo, whether it was Sage Realm or Great Sage, they were all about laying the foundation. The Sage Realm was laying the foundation for the body, and Great Sage was laying the foundation for the spirit. Since it was laying the foundation, then its importance was conceivable. High-rise buildings were built from the ground, and the emphasis was on a solid foundation. It was a matter with grave importance. But does he have the time right now? He certainly did not. On the contrary, he must improve his strength as quickly as possible. The endless energy contained in this Heaven's retribution was a big supplement for him. If it was another energy, he might still have concerns, but this Heaven's retribution contained the utmost strength and utmost just energy. It was the purest. As long as he could absorb it, there was no fear of hidden dangers. Yi Shiwen strode forward in big steps. chasing and killing the heavenly lightning troops, like a god. His face was expressionless. The flashing sparks lit up his face, making him look like a god. At this time, in the eyes of the remaining people on the battlefield, Yi Shiwen was no different from the gods in the skies. After another half hour, the tribulation clouds in the sky dissipated little by little. The heavenly lightning troops that had initially filled the sky were also completely massacred by Yi Shiwen and turned into energy, all of which were absorbed by Yi Shiwen. At this time, Yi Shiwen no longer had the jerkiness and tart proficiency when he first had a breakthrough into the great sage. On the contrary, he seemed more rounded. With this huge energy, it completely consolidated the realm of the great sage realm initial, pushing him directly to the peak. It was precisely him borrowing this heaven's retribution to push his cultivation all the way to the peak state. "Brother Yi, that scoundrel is running away." Suddenly, a loud shout came from below. He was pointing straight at the great sage realm peak master. It was none other than Miao Yu who spoke. Although many people were focusing on the battle between Yi Shiwen and heaven's retribution, some people's thoughts were on the great sage realm peak master. At this time, seeing that the heaven's retribution was directly scattered by Yi Shiwen, he immediately escaped. What about revenge? What about enmity? In the face of absolute tyrannical strength, it was just like a huge joke. At this time, wanting to take revenge was simply heading for death. At this time, the glory of any sect was not worth it. The notion of survival prevailed. Yi Shiwen sneered and said, "Where are you going?" Since he had said that everyone didn't get to leave, this person also had to. He took a step, and in a flash he caught up with the great sage realm peak. He clenched his fists and turned into a big star, and smashed it straight down. "You demon! You will die painfully." The great sage realm peak master screamed. His body was smashed apart by Yi Zaiwen's single punch. He screamed as he was smashed to death. He was still very unsatisfied even before he died. He never thought that an entire army would one day be wiped out directly by one person. Although most of it was done by the heavenly lightning troops, it was undeniable that they were completely eradicated all because of Yi Shiwen. The retribution clouds in the sky dispersed little by little. The mighty heavens might also vanish little by little, as if it had never existed. Yi Shiwen fell from the sky. These true martial school disciples looked at Yi Shiwen in awe. Previously, Yi Shiwen was already so scary before advancing into the great sage, let alone now. Also, the most important thing was that they all saw Yi Zaiwen's retribution in person. The horrifying scene had various anomalies. If it were them instead, they would probably already be killed by the disaster. No, they were simply not qualified to elicit such a frightening disaster. A real great sage realm peak master suffered a big loss in Yi Zaiwen's hands, killed directly by Yi Zaiwen's punch. They couldn't help but pay attention to such a terrifying person. Okay, I probably don't need to say the specifics. You probably also know that Emergence School has invaded, said Yi Shiwen in a calm tone. Looking at the remaining disciples of True Martial School, their faces still had a bit of disbelief. Although it had been said many times that Emergence School might invade, when the actual day came, there was no warning sign of it at all. It could be said that they were all prepared, but they were still caught off guard again. In the past few years, everyone in True Martial School had been saying Emergence School would invade. However, it was all just talk and there were no related indications at all. Hence, the sudden attack of Emergence School really caught them off guard and almost blindsided them. If it weren't for Yi Zaiwen's assistance this time, they might have all been wiped out right here. They all looked at Yi Shiwen in unison. At this time, in the absence of other senior management, Yi Shiwen, who had just exhibited godly power, was their backbone. In this chaotic situation, they could only survive by following strong men like Yi Shiwen. "You don't have to look at me. I still have a matter to take care of. You all go back to True Martial School first. Be careful on the way back." Yi Shiwen said that he had no intention to return to True Martial School now, because he still couldn't help but worry about his relatives in Yi Yuan sect. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.